They say true character is revealed not in the light of day, but in the darkest moments when no one is watching. I thought I knew Denver, my husband of 14 years. He wasn't perfect, nobody is. But he had this remarkable ability to make the ordinary feel extraordinary. His spontaneity brought color to our structured life. But there's a razor-thin line between spontaneity and recklessness, between charming and calculating. And I was about to discover just how far Denver was willing to go to pursue his own happiness at the expense of our family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started with the credit card statements I never saw, the bank accounts I didn't have access to, the business trips that grew longer and more frequent. Denver handled our finances. Always had. "You've got enough on your plate with the kids," he'd say with that disarming smile. "Let me worry about the boring stuff." And like a fool, I trusted him. After all, this was the man who held my hand through 16 hours of labor when our twins were born, the man who promised to always protect us. But promises, as I would soon learn, meant nothing to Denver, not when they competed with his desires. Remember the morning I realized he was gone, really gone. The twins, Will and Mason, had just turned 3, all energy and chaos and sticky fingers. Madison, my 12-year-old from my first marriage, was helping me coax them into their clothes for preschool. "Mom, did Denver say when he'd be back?" Madison asked, wrestling a shirt over Mason's head while I chased Will around the kitchen island. "His suitcase is gone, but so is that big duffel bag he never uses." I paused, a strange heaviness settling in my chest. Denver had left yesterday for what he claimed was a 3-day conference in Phoenix. Standard procedure, the quick kiss goodbye, the promise to call when he landed, the reassurance that he'd bring back souvenirs for the kids, but he hadn't called. And he always called. "Let me check something," I said to Madison, trying to keep my voice casual. "Can you finish getting them dressed? We're running late." I walked to our bedroom, pulled out my phone, and called the hotel where Denver was supposedly staying. The cheerful receptionist had no record of a Denver Reynolds checked, in or expected. I tried his cell, straight to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. That's when I noticed the closet door slightly ajar. Inside, half of Denver's clothes were missing. Not the random assortment you'd grab for a business trip, but a careful selection of his favorite items, the expensive ones, the ones with meaning. My heart began to race. I went to his dresser, pulled open the drawers. His passport was gone. So was the vintage watch his grandfather had left him, the one he said he'd never travel with because it was too valuable, too irreplaceable. With trembling hands, I opened his nightstand drawer, already knowing what I would find. The small velvet box that had contained his wedding ring was there, and when I opened it, the ring was inside. He'd left it behind. For a moment, I just stood there, the room spinning around me. Then I heard Madison calling from the kitchen. "Mom? There's an envelope on the counter with your name on it." I walked back to the kitchen in a daze, took the cream-colored envelope from Madison's outstretched hand. My name was written on the front in Denver's distinct handwriting, all sharp angles and decisive strokes. I stared at it, suddenly afraid of what was inside. "Can you take the boys to the living room for a minute?" I asked Madison. She gave me a long look, far too perceptive for her years, then nodded and herded the protesting twins away. With unsteady fingers, I tore open the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. "Colleen, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've tried to make this work, but I can't do it anymore. The truth is, I was never cut out for this life. The responsibility, the routine, the constant demands. I need something different. Something more. I wish I could have been the person you needed me to be, but I've realized that pretending is only making things worse for all of us. You deserve someone who wants this life, who can embrace it without resentment. That's not me. It never was. I've left enough in the joint account to cover the next month of expenses. After that, you'll need to figure something out. I know that's not fair, but none of this is fair. Please don't try to contact me. This decision is final. Denver P.S. I know about the credit cards and loans. I'm sorry for that too. I read the letter. Twice. 3 times. Trying to make sense of the words. What credit cards? What loans? The joint account had never held more than enough to cover our basic monthly expenses. Denver had always maintained separate accounts for our savings, investments, An emergency fund, accounts I had trusted him to manage. With a growing sense of dread, I pulled out my laptop and attempted to log into our online banking. My password didn't work. I tried another bank where I thought we had accounts. No record of my username. It was as if our financial life together had been erased, or had never existed at all. The doorbell rang, startling me. Through the window, I could see a delivery man holding a stack of envelopes, certified mail. I signed for them with a sense of unreality, then stood in the foyer staring at the 5 envelopes in my hands. 5 different banks and credit card companies, 5 notices marked urgent and final warning. I opened them one by one, my hands growing colder with each revelation. Credit cards I'd never seen, loans I'd never signed for, all bearing my name alongside Denver's, all carrying balances that made my stomach drop, all demanding immediate payment. The final tally made my knees buckle, $53,478.92 in debt that I knew nothing about, debt that was now apparently my responsibility. Mom? Madison's voice came from behind me. The twins are asking for breakfast, but I think we might be out of milk. And, are you okay? You look like you're going to be sick. I turned to her, this child who was not a child at all in that moment, but my witness, my anchor to reality. I opened my mouth to reassure her, to say something that would make this all seem manageable, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, what escaped was a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Mom? Madison repeated, her eyes wide with concern. We're going to be late for preschool, I finally managed, gathering the notices and shoving them into a drawer. And yes, we need milk. And a lot of other things, it seems. What I didn't say, what I couldn't bring myself to say just yet, was that Denver had not just abandoned us emotionally. He had left us drowning in debt, with no savings, no safety net, and no warning. He had systematically dismantled our financial security while maintaining the illusion of stability and care. And I, who had trusted him completely, was now left to explain to my children why their world was about to change in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The days following Denver's disappearance blurred together in a haze of disbelief and mounting panic. Each hour brought a new revelation, another layer of betrayal peeled back to reveal the elaborate deception he had constructed around us. I called in sick to my part-time job at the library, unable to face colleagues or students. Instead, I spent hours on the phone with banks and credit card companies, piecing together the financial nightmare Denver had left behind. For the past 18 months, coinciding almost exactly with the birth of the twins, Denver had been systematically opening new accounts, taking out personal loans, and maxing out credit cards, all joint accounts with my name attached, all requiring my signature, which he had apparently forged with practiced ease. Mrs. Reynolds, we have the application right here, one particularly sympathetic bank manager told me. I can email you a copy if you'd like to see it. When the document arrived, I stared at my signature in disbelief. It was good, close enough to fool a bank officer, close enough that challenging it would require a lengthy legal battle I couldn't afford. Close enough that the debt was, for all practical purposes, as much mine as his. The twins, mercifully, were too young to understand what was happening. They asked for Daddy with decreasing frequency as the days passed, easily distracted by toys and stories. Madison, however, watched everything with those observant eyes that missed nothing. He's not coming back, is he? She asked on the 4th night, after I had finally managed to get the twins to sleep. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and notices, trying to create some semblance of a budget with resources that simply didn't exist. No, sweetie, I answered, too exhausted for pretense. I don't think he is. Madison nodded, absorbing this confirmation of what she had already deduced. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, her expression serious beyond her years. Is it about money? She asked, gesturing to the papers spread across the table. I hesitated, torn between protecting her from adult concerns and acknowledging the reality she could clearly see for herself. Partly, I admitted. Denver left us with some financial problems. How bad? I sighed, rubbing my temples where a persistent headache had taken up residence. Bad enough, but don't worry, I'll figure it out. That's my job, not yours. Madison's eyes narrowed slightly, unconvinced. I can help, you know. I'm not a little kid. Like the credit card statements in the bathroom trash? She asked innocently. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, the ones you were crying over this morning? The precision of her question startled me. She hadn't just glanced at the statements, she had read them thoroughly enough to tally the amounts. Yes, I said finally. It's a lot of money. Money we don't have. Because Denver took it? Because Denver borrowed it in both our names and then left me to pay it back. Madison processed this, her face hardening with a hint of the adult she would someday become. That's stealing. It's complicated, I said, though in truth, her assessment was more accurate than my equivocation. No, it's not, she insisted. In The Case of the Missing Inheritance, that movie with Detective Polly Chambers, the husband did the same thing. He forged his wife's signature on loan documents and then disappeared with the money. Detective Polly tracked him to Argentina, using bank records and credit card receipts. I couldn't help but smile despite everything. Madison and her detective movies, she had been obsessed with them since she was 9, watching everything from classic noir to modern procedurals. This isn't a movie, Maddie, I said gently. Real life is messier, and we can't exactly hop on a plane to Argentina even if that's where Denver went. We don't need to, she said with the confident certainty of a child. Detective work starts with the evidence at hand. What do we know about where Denver might have gone? Did he have family somewhere? Friends we didn't know about? A place he always talked about visiting? I started to dismiss her questions, then paused. In the chaos of discovering the debt, I'd barely thought about where Denver might have actually gone. He has a brother in Seattle, I said slowly. Evan. They weren't close. At least that's what Denver always told me. But last year, Denver started mentioning him more often. Said Evan had some business opportunity he was considering. Madison nodded, clearly filing this information away. What else? He traveled to Las Vegas 3 times in the past 6 months, for work. And he started taking unusual interest in property listings in Costa Rica. I thought he was just daydreaming. We used to talk about retiring somewhere tropical someday. Costa Rica doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States, Madison announced with the certainty of someone who had absorbed far too many crime shows for her age. That's actually not true, I said, surprised by her assumption. But I doubt Denver was thinking about legal implications when he stole $50,000 and abandoned his family, Madison finished bluntly. I think he probably was. Her directness was jarring but clarifying. In my shock and grief, I had been making excuses for Denver, casting his actions as a personal failing rather than what they truly were, calculated, premeditated, and deliberate. You're right, I admitted, seeing my daughter with new eyes. This wasn't a momentary breakdown or a midlife crisis. Denver planned this, probably for months. Madison nodded, satisfied that I was finally seeing what she already understood. So what are we going to do about it? We're not going to do anything, I said firmly, parental instinct reasserting itself. I'm going to handle this. You're going to focus on school and helping with your brothers and being 12. She crossed her arms, unconvinced. Mom, I can help. I'm good at solving puzzles. This isn't a puzzle, Madison. It's our life. And right now, I need to figure out how to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Finding Denver. That's not even on my priority list right now. It wasn't entirely true. Part of me desperately wanted to find him, to demand answers, to force him to face what he'd done, to make him take responsibility for the family he'd abandoned. But another part knew that energy spent chasing Denver was energy diverted from the more pressing task of survival. Madison must have seen the conflict in my face because her expression softened. Okay, she said simply, though I could tell from the set of her jaw that this conversation was far from over. What can I do to help right now? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, overwhelmed by gratitude for this remarkable child. You're already helping more than you know, I told her. But if you really want a job, you can help me organize these statements by due date. We need to figure out which ones have to be paid first. She nodded seriously and pulled a stack of papers toward her. As we worked side by side in the quiet kitchen, I felt a strange new bond forming between us. A partnership born of necessity, but strengthened by something more profound. Respect. Madison was seeing me not just as her mother, but as a person, facing impossible odds. And I was seeing her not just as my child, but as a keen mind and a fierce ally. What I didn't realize then was just how crucial that alliance. 6 months before Denver walked out of our lives, everything seemed perfectly normal. Our house in Tampa's suburbs was the picture of middle-class stability: 4 bedrooms, a fenced backyard, and a kitchen island where Madison did homework while I prepared dinner. Denver had insisted on buying it when we discovered I was pregnant with twins. "We need the space," he'd said, showing me the listing with excitement. The price made me nervous, but Denver assured me we could afford it. Trust me on the finances. That's my department, remember? And I had trusted him. Completely. Our daily routine had a comfortable predictability. Denver left for work at 7:30 a.m., kissing us goodbye with the same cheerful energy whether it was Monday or Friday. I spent my days with the twins, working part-time, at the community college library when Denver could watch them, or when our neighbor Frida could babysit. "How was work today?" I asked one evening, passing Denver the salad bowl. "Same old," he replied. "The Anderson account is giving us trouble." "Can't you just tell them that?" Madison asked. Denver smiled, ruffling her hair. "Business doesn't work that way, kiddo. The customer is always right even when they're wrong." Was that a clue? A glimpse into his disillusionment? At the time, it seemed like typical Denver humor, slightly cynical but harmless. After dinner came the twins' bath time, a chaotic splash fest that inevitably left both Denver and me soaked. He seemed good with them, patient in a way I'd never expected when we first learned we were having twins. He never complained about midnight feedings or diaper changes. "You're a natural," I told him once, watching him wrangle both squirming boys into pajamas. "Nah," he demurred with a smile. "I'm just faking it till I make it." Another clue, perhaps. Another hint that his devoted father persona was just that. A role he played convincingly while secretly planning his exit. Our evenings fell into a pattern. Madison would read or watch her detective shows. Denver would retreat to his home office, claiming to catch up on work emails or manage finances. I'd fold laundry, prepare for the next day, or collapse on the couch, exhausted from chasing toddlers. Sometimes, Denver would join me, slipping an arm around my shoulders as we watched television together. Other times he'd stay in his office until late, emerging only when I was already half asleep. "Coming to bed?" I'd ask drowsily. "Soon," he'd promise. "Just finishing up some things." "What things?" I never asked. I assumed it was work, budget planning, ordinary adult responsibilities. I never imagined he was researching property in Costa Rica, communicating with his brother about their Phoenix project, systematically dismantling our financial security. While I slept down the hall, weekends had their own rhythm. Saturday mornings were for family activities, park trips, children's museum visits, grocery shopping. Denver was always present, always engaged, snapping photos, helping Madison push the twins on swings. "You've got the weekend dad thing down pat," another father commented once. Denver laughed, clapping the man's shoulder. "Just making memories, right? That's what it's all about." Making memories. Was that part of his plan? Creating a catalog of perfect family moments before his disappearance? Saturday afternoons often found Denver running errands alone. "Guy time," he called it. "I'll pick up that light fixture for the kitchen," he'd offer. Always helpful, always considerate. The perfect husband. "I think Dad's having an affair," Madison announced one Saturday as we folded laundry together, the twins napping upstairs. I nearly dropped the basket. "What? Why would you say that?" She shrugged, methodically matching tiny socks. In the suspicious spouse case, Detective Polly figured out the husband was cheating because he kept running solo errands on weekends, and Dad's been doing that a lot lately. "Madison," I said firmly, "real life isn't like your detective shows. Daddy's not having an affair." She dropped the subject, but was she right? Not about an affair, perhaps, but about his deception? Had his weekend absences been opportunities to plan his escape without my knowledge? Sundays were for family brunch, Denver's specialty. "My 3 favorite people," he'd say, surveying us around the table. "What should we do today?" Those brunches were where we planned our future, or where I thought we were planning our future. Vacations we'd take when the twins were older. Madison's college options. Renovations we wanted to make, someday when we have the money. I'd love to take the kids to that lighthouse in Maine again, I said one Sunday in February. Remember how much Madison loved it last time? Lighthouse 2015. Madison chimed in with a grin. Dad's computer password. That's how much he loved it too. Denver laughed, but was there discomfort in his eyes? That was a great trip, he agreed, quickly changing the subject. Looking back, I can see 100 such moments, tiny fractures in the facade of our perfect life. The way Denver would change the subject when I brought up long-term plans, the vague answers about our savings, the increasing frequency of business, trips. When are you coming home? I'd ask during our nightly call when he was away. Soon, he'd promise. Miss me? Always, I'd answer truthfully. The twins keep looking for you. Tell them I love them, Denver would say. Tell them I'll make it up to them when I get back. Was there guilt in his voice during those calls? Or was it all part of the performance? One evening in March, about 2 months before he left, I came downstairs after putting the twins to bed to find Denver at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop. He closed it quickly when he saw me. Everything okay? I asked. Just work stuff, he said dismissively. Anderson account again. You seem stressed lately, I observed. Is there anything I can do to help? He reached across the table and took my hand. You're already doing it. Being here, taking care of the kids, holding down the fort. I couldn't ask for more. That night, as we got ready for bed, Denver seemed unusually attentive, asking about my day in detail, listening to my complaints about the twins' sleep regression. You're a great mom, Colleen, he said as we lay in bed. The kids are lucky to have you. They're lucky to have both of us, I corrected him. We're a team, right? He was quiet for a long moment. Right, he said finally. A team. Was that the moment he decided? Or had the decision been made long before? The last normal weekend before Denver left, we took the kids to the beach. It was a perfect Florida spring day. Denver seemed especially present, taking dozens of photos, building sandcastles with the twins, engaging in a water fight with Madison. I want to remember this day forever, he said as we packed up to leave. I leaned over and kissed him, sand gritty between our lips. We have a lifetime of days like this ahead of us, I promised. He didn't reply, just smiled that strange, sad smile that would haunt my memories. 3 days later, he was gone. Looking back, the signs were there, subtle but undeniable. I simply chose not to hear them, dismissing them as ordinary marital friction or parenting stress. The first real warning came about 4 months before Denver left, during a conversation about Madison's school trip to Washington, D.C. It's $800, I told Denver as we cleaned up after dinner. I know it's a lot, but she's been looking forward to it all year. Denver continued loading the dishwasher, his movements slightly more forceful than necessary. We don't have $800 for a school trip right now, Colleen. What about the emergency fund? I suggested. The emergency fund is for emergencies, he interrupted, voice uncharacteristically sharp. A school trip isn't an emergency. The argument escalated, unusual for us. We rarely fought about money. Denver had always been generous, sometimes even impulsive with purchases. This new financial conservatism felt jarring. At least let me see the budget, I insisted. If things are tight, maybe I can pick up more hours at the library. Denver's expression hardened. You don't trust me to manage our finances? Of course I trust you. I just want to understand the situation. The situation, he said coldly, is that I work 60 hours a week to provide for this family, and I don't need to justify every financial decision to you. He walked out, ending the conversation. Later, he apologized, blaming work stress and promising to see if we could make the trip work. Madison went to Washington the following month, Denver presenting the money as if it had never been an issue. But something had shifted, a small crack in the foundation of trust. The second warning came in Denver's new obsession with privacy. He'd always been somewhat protective of his phone and laptop, but gradually, that privacy extended beyond reasonable caution. Passwords changed, screens were angled away when I entered a room. Conversations ended abruptly when I approached. Who was that? I asked one evening, walking into the kitchen as Denver quickly ended a call. Work, he said, sliding his phone into his pocket. The Anderson account again. The Anderson account became his standard explanation for everything. Late nights, weekend, calls, distracted behavior. Dad's being weird, Madison commented one Saturday afternoon while Denver was supposedly at a hardware store. How so? I asked, only half listening as I matched socks. He won't let me use his laptop anymore, she said. I used to play games on it sometimes, but now he says it's for work only. That seems reasonable, I replied. He probably has confidential client information on there. Madison shrugged. Maybe, but he also changed the password on the family iPad, and he gets all jumpy when his phone rings. Madison, I sighed. Not everything is a mystery to be solved. Daddy's just busy with work. The third warning was financial. Denver's business trips increased in frequency, 1 or 2 each month, then nearly weekly excursions. Another trip? I asked one evening as he packed. Didn't you just get back from Chicago on Monday? This one's important, he said, not meeting my eyes. Potential new client in Las Vegas. Big account. I sat on the bed, watching him select clothes with unusual, Chelsea, you're gone so much lately. The twins miss you. A flicker of something. Guilt? Regret? Crossed his face. I know, and I'm sorry. But this is for us, for our future. I believed him. I helped him pack, kissed him goodbye, and thought nothing of the credit card statement that arrived 3 days later with no hotel charges. In Las Vegas, but several restaurant bills from Tampa establishments I'd never heard of. When I mentioned it casually, Denver explained it away. Company card for the Vegas trip, he said. Those Tampa charges must be from client lunches last month. It made sense. It was reasonable. I had no reason to doubt him. The fourth warning was perhaps the most significant, though I recognized it, least of all. Denver began asking strange, hypothetical questions. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if we'd never met? He asked one night as we sat on the patio after the children were in bed. Not really, I answered honestly. I mean, I wouldn't have the twins. I can't imagine life without them now. He nodded, swirling wine in his glass. And Madison? Do you think she'd be different if I hadn't been in her life? The question struck me as odd. She was only 2 when we met. You're the only father she's ever known. Why are you asking this? He shrugged, expression distant. Just thinking about how lives interconnect, how one decision changes everything. If I'd taken that job in Seattle instead of staying in Tampa, we'd never have met. 2 weeks before he left, Denver asked another strange question as we lay in bed. Do you think people ever really change, Colleen? Or are we all just pretending, playing roles until we can't keep up the act anymore? I turned toward him in the darkness. That's a pretty philosophical question for midnight on a Tuesday. He didn't smile. I'm serious. Do you think the person we are at 20 is still there at 40, just hidden under layers of compromise and responsibility? I don't know, I said. I think we evolve. The core might stay the same, but life changes us. And if the changes feel wrong, if the person you've become feels like a stranger, a chill ran through me. Denver, are you okay? Is something wrong? He reached out, stroking my cheek with unexpected tenderness. I'm fine, just thinking too much. Ignore me. The final warning came just 3 days before Denver disappeared. It was a beautiful spring morning as I prepared breakfast for the twins. Denver stood at the counter, unusually quiet. I was thinking, I said, cutting a waffle into tiny pieces. Maybe we could take the kids to that new children's museum this weekend. Will would love the dinosaur exhibit. Denver didn't respond, staring into his coffee mug. Denver? I prompted. The dinosaur exhibit? This weekend? He looked up, expression clearing. Sorry, what? Oh, the museum. Yeah, that sounds great. Are you okay? You seem distracted lately. He kissed the top of my head. Just work stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. The Anderson account again? I teased. A strange expression crossed his face, almost panic, quickly masked. Something like that. He left for work shortly after. I watched him from the doorway, struck by a sudden, inexplicable certainty that something was ending. I shook, off the feeling, attributing it to lack of sleep. 3 days later, he was gone, and all the warning signs I'd ignored came rushing back with devastating clarity. The morning Denver disappeared started like any other Tuesday. My alarm went off at 6:15 a.m., and I reached over to silence it, careful not to wake him. Except my hand met empty sheets, already cool to the touch. I wasn't concerned. Denver sometimes rose early for important meetings. I shuffled to the bathroom, going through my morning routine on autopilot. The house was unusually quiet. Normally, Denver would be downstairs by now, coffee brewing, news playing softly on the TV. "Denver?" I called, making my way downstairs. No answer. The kitchen was pristine, untouched since I'd cleaned it the night before. I checked the garage. His car was gone. An early meeting, I reasoned, though his power suit for important clients was still hanging in the closet. I started coffee and began preparing breakfast for the kids, pushing down the first tiny flutter of unease. Madison appeared first, her school uniform slightly rumpled. "Morning, Mom," she yawned. "Where's Denver?" "Early meeting, I think," I replied, setting her waffles in front of her. "He didn't leave a note." Madison frowned slightly. "His suitcase is gone," I noticed when I went to the hall closet for my jacket. My hand paused in the act of pouring coffee. "His suitcase?" She nodded. "The big one, and that duffel bag he never uses." The flutter of unease grew stronger, but I suppressed it. "He must have that conference in Phoenix," I said. "He mentioned it last week, remember?" Madison shrugged, unconvinced. The twins' monitor crackled to life with Mason's morning babble, followed by Will's louder demands. "Mama! Up! Mama!" For the next 30 minutes, I was consumed with motherhood, changing diapers, dressing squirming toddlers, brushing teeth, reminding Madison about her lunch. It wasn't until I had settled the twins in their high chairs that I remembered to check my phone. No messages from Denver, no missed calls. I called his cell, expecting his usual brisk greeting. Instead, the call went directly to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said after the beep, keeping my voice deliberately light. "Just wondering where you disappeared to this morning. Call me when you get a chance. Love you." Denver never turned his phone off. Even in meetings, he kept it on vibrate. Accessible for family emergencies. "Mom?" Madison's voice broke through my thoughts. "We need to leave in 10 minutes if I'm going to make the bus." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. Go brush your teeth." The next half hour passed in the usual morning rush, getting Madison off to the bus stop, cleaning up breakfast, changing Mason's diaper again, finding Will's favorite stuffed dinosaur. Through it all, I kept checking my phone, expecting Denver's call. It wasn't until Madison had been dispatched to school and the twins were playing in the living room that I allowed myself to fully confront the growing sense that something was wrong. I called Denver's office, my fingers drumming nervously on the counter. "Riverfront Marketing Group, how may I direct your call?" "Hi, this is Colleen Reynolds, Denver's wife. I'm trying to reach him, but his cell phone seems to be off." "Is he in meetings this morning?" A pause, longer than seemed warranted. Let me check for you, Mrs. Reynolds. One moment, please." The hold music played for nearly a minute. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reynolds, but Mr. Reynolds hasn't come into the office today. According to his calendar, he's scheduled to be out all week. At the Phoenix conference." The Phoenix conference. "Yes, of course," I said, trying to sound normal. "I knew about the conference. I just thought it started tomorrow, not today." "Thank you." I hung up, my mind racing. If Denver had left for Phoenix, why hadn't he mentioned it last night? Why wasn't he answering his phone? I called the hotel in Phoenix where Denver usually stayed. "Grand Pinnacle Hotel. How may I assist you?" "Hi. I'm trying to confirm a reservation for my husband, Denver Reynolds. He should be checking in today for the Western Marketing Conference." More typing, another pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see a reservation under that name, either for today or for the upcoming week." "Could you check for any reservation? Under Riverfront Marketing Group?" "Of course." More typing. "I do see several reservations for Riverfront, but none under the name Reynolds. The names I have are Matthews, Sorensen, and Greer, Denver's colleagues. But no Denver." My heart was pounding now, anxiety transforming into full-blown panic. If Denver wasn't at work and wasn't in Phoenix, where was he? And why had he taken his suitcase? I forced myself to breathe deeply, to think rationally. Perhaps the conference venue had changed. Perhaps he was driving instead of flying. Perhaps his phone was charging in the car. As I constructed increasingly implausible scenarios, the twins' happy shrieks reminded me of my immediate responsibilities. Whatever was happening with Denver, I still had 2 3-year-olds who needed my attention. For the next hour, I immersed myself in their world of blocks and stuffed animals, their uncomplicated joy a temporary balm for my growing anxiety. But as morning stretched toward noon with still no word from Denver, I couldn't ignore the situation any longer. By lunchtime, my worry had evolved into cold, creeping dread. I picked at my sandwich, appetite gone, mind racing through possibilities. Car accident, medical emergency, some professional crisis requiring immediate attention. But none of these scenarios explained the suitcase, the duffel bag he never used, the silent departure, the turned-off phone. After lunch came the twins' nap time. I used the quiet to search the house for clues. In our bedroom, I found that Denver's favorite clothes were missing. His worn leather belt, the watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, his casual weekend shirts. Not items. In his home office, the desk was meticulously organized, nothing obviously amiss. But the framed family photo that usually sat on his desk was missing. Just the 4 of us at the beach last summer, all squinting into the sun. People don't take family photos to business conferences. They take them when they're leaving and want a reminder of what they've left behind. I sank into Denver's office chair, reality taking terrible shape in my mind. The missing clothes, the suitcase, the turned-off phone, the absence of hotel reservations, the missing photograph. Denver hadn't gone to a conference. Denver had left. But people don't just leave without a word, without explanation, without goodbye. Not after 14 years of marriage, not with 3 children at home. Not Denver, who had kissed me goodnight and told me he loved me mere hours before disappearing. I was still sitting in his office, frozen with disbelief, when the doorbell rang. At the door was a delivery man holding a stack of certified mail envelopes. "Colleen Reynolds?" he asked. I nodded, still dazed. "I have some certified mail for you. Need your signature right here." I signed mechanically, taking the stack of envelopes. 5 of them, all from different financial institutions, all marked urgent or final notice in bold red letters. With trembling fingers, I opened the first envelope. It was from First National Bank, regarding a personal loan of $12,500 now, 60 days past due. The letter detailed the consequences of continued non-payment, damage to credit score, legal action, possible wage garnishment. The loan was in both our names, Denver Reynolds and Colleen Reynolds, jointly liable for the full amount. A loan I knew nothing about. The second envelope contained a similar notice from American Express regarding a credit card with an outstanding balance of $8,347. The third was from a credit union I'd never heard of, for another loan of $15,000. The fourth and fifth were from additional credit card companies, with combined balances exceeding $17,000, over $50,000 in debt, all in both our names, all unknown to me until this moment. I was still staring at the notices when I heard a soft sound from the doorway. Madison stood there, school backpack still on her shoulders. "Mom? Why are you crying?" I hadn't realized I was crying. "Madison? You're home early." "It's half day," she reminded me. "Teacher development. I told you last week." I didn't remember. I couldn't remember anything beyond these horrifying notices and Denver's absence. "Mom? What's wrong? Where's Denver? Did something happen?" Madison's voice rose slightly, anxiety creeping in. Before I could speak, Mason's cry came through the baby monitor, followed by Will's. "The twins are up," Madison said unnecessarily, eyes fixed on my tear-streaked face. "I'll get them," I said, automatically. "Could you put these away? I don't want them getting torn up." Madison nodded, her gaze dropping to the papers, her expression changing as she registered the bold red warnings. When I came downstairs with the twins, Madison had cleared the kitchen table of the financial notices. "Mom," she called, "there's an envelope on the counter with your name on it." My heart seemed to stop. An envelope with my name on it. Denver's explanation, perhaps. The envelope sat on the counter, cream-colored with my name in Denver's distinctive handwriting. I stared at it, both desperate to know its contents and terrified of the confirmation it would bring. Finally, I tore it open and unfolded the single sheet inside. "Colleen, By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've tried to make this work, but I can't do it anymore. The truth is, I was never cut out for this life. The responsibility, the routine, the constant demands. I need something different. Something more. I wish I could have been the person you needed me to be, but I've realized that pretending is only making things worse for all of us. You deserve someone who wants this life, who can embrace it without resentment. That's not me. It never was. I've left enough in the joint account to cover the next month of expenses. After that, you'll need to figure something out. I know that's not fair, but none of this is fair. Please don't try to contact me. This decision is final. Denver P.S. I know about the credit cards and loans. I'm sorry for that too. I read the letter, twice, 3 times, trying to comprehend the breathtaking callousness. I've left enough in the joint account to cover the next month of expenses. As if our 14 years together, our children, our entire shared life could be reduced to a month's living expenses. Mom? Madison's voice came from the doorway, high and frightened. Mom, what's happening? What's wrong? I looked up at my daughter, her face pale with fear, and behind her the twins peering around the doorframe, eyes wide and confused by my distress. My children, my responsibility, my reason to keep going despite the devastating blow Denver had delivered. Come here, I said, opening my arms. All of you, come here. I gathered all 3 of them close, holding them tight, as if physically shielding them from the harsh reality I would eventually have to explain. Something has happened, I began. Carefully. Denver has gone away for a while. He won't be coming home tonight. Is he at the Phoenix conference? Madison asked, her voice small. I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. No, sweetie. He's not at a conference. He's decided he needs some time away from us, from our family. Madison's face crumpled, understanding dawning with painful clarity. He left us. Just left? Will patted my wet cheek, brow furrowed with concern. Mama sad? Where Dada? Mason echoed his brother. Want Dada? Want Dada now. Their innocent questions, their confusion, their absolute certainty that if they just asked clearly enough, their father would reappear. It was almost more than I could bear. Daddy won't be home for a while, I said, choosing my words with excruciating. He needed to go away, but we're going to be okay. The 4 of us, we're going to be just fine. Madison's expression said she didn't believe me. The twins, picking up on emotional undercurrents they couldn't understand, began to fuss. Will Dada call on the phone? Will asked hopefully. Say night-night? The question broke something inside me. I pulled him closer, kissing the top of his head. I don't think so, buddy. Not tonight. The first 24 hours after discovering Denver's abandonment passed in a fog of disbelief and practical necessities. The twins, too young to understand the seismic shift in our family structure, continued to ask for Dada with decreasing frequency. Madison moved through the house like a silent shadow, watchful and solemn, helping with the twins without being asked, her usual preteen exuberance replaced by a wary vigilance that broke my heart. I functioned on autopilot, maintaining routines, preparing meals, reading bedtime stories, all while my mind raced with unanswerable questions and mounting fear. Each time I checked the joint bank account Denver had mentioned in his letter, the balance remained unchanged, $843.17. A pittance compared to our monthly expenses. The morning after Denver's disappearance, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table while the twins napped, making desperate calculations on a yellow legal pad. Mortgage payment due in 12 days, $596 utilities, approximately $340 car payment, $375 groceries for a family of 4, at least $600 per month health insurance premium, $450 at preschool for the twins, $850 per month. Phone bill, $120. The numbers refused to cooperate, to magically rearrange themselves into a manageable budget. My part-time job at the library paid $16.50 an hour for 20 hours a week, enough to supplement our family income when Denver was supposedly bringing in the bulk of our money, but nowhere near sufficient to support a household of 4 on my own, and that was just the regular monthly expenses. It didn't account for the 5 delinquent accounts Denver had left behind, with their mounting late fees and interest charges. "We need a plan," I murmured to myself, tapping my pen against the legal pad. "One step at a time, prioritize, organize." I made a new list, forcing myself to think pragmatically rather than emotionally. Call all creditors. Explain situation. Request payment plans. Contact mortgage company. See if they offer forbearance options. Apply for emergency assistance programs. Look for full-time employment with benefits. Research childcare options that won't consume entire paycheck. Consult lawyer about Denver's financial fraud and abandonment. The list was both reassuring in its concreteness and overwhelming in its implications. Each item represented hours of phone calls, paperwork, research, and potential rejection. And all of it would have to be accomplished while caring for 2 active toddlers and supporting a traumatized 12-year-old. I was still staring at the list, paralyzed by the magnitude of the challenge, when the doorbell rang. For one wild moment, I thought it might be Denver, returning to explain that this had all been a terrible misunderstanding. Instead, I opened the door to find Frida, our neighbor from across the street, holding a foil-covered casserole dish. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her kind face creased with concern. "I noticed Denver's car hasn't been home, and I thought you might appreciate a meal with everything you have on your plate with the twins." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Did she know? Had Denver's abandonment somehow become neighborhood? Knowledge already? "Thank you," I managed finally, accepting the dish. "That's very thoughtful." Frida hesitated, clearly sensing that something was wrong. "Is everything okay, Colleen? You seem upset." I considered deflecting, maintaining the facade of normalcy. But the weight of secrets suddenly felt unbearable. "Denver's gone," I said, the words emerging with surprising steadiness. "He left. Yesterday morning, while we were all asleep. He's not coming back." Frida's expression shifted from concern to shock to a deep maternal compassion that nearly undid me. "Oh, Colleen," she murmured, stepping forward to embrace me. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "No one did," I said, trying and failing to keep the bitterness from my voice. That was rather the point of his middle-of-the-night exit. Frida followed me into the kitchen, where I set down the casserole and mechanically began making coffee, the routine providing a welcome distraction. "My schedule is flexible," she said, pulling a notepad from her purse and jotting down her phone number. "I'm retired, and my grandchildren are all grown. I miss having little ones around. Please, don't hesitate to call, day or night." I nodded, tucking the paper into my pocket, pathetically grateful for this small kindness in the midst of overwhelming crisis. After Frida left, I steeled myself for the first item on my list, calling the creditors. I spread the notices across the table, organized them by due date, and reached for the phone. The twins would be up from their nap soon, and Madison would return from school shortly after. This narrow window of quiet might be my only opportunity to begin addressing the financial nightmare. The first call went about as well as I expected. After navigating an automated menu and waiting on hold for 20 minutes, I reached a representative who expressed rote sympathy for my situation, but limited flexibility regarding the outstanding balance. "I understand you're going through a difficult time, Mrs. Reynolds," the woman said, her voice professionally detached. "But the account is 60 days past due, and we've already sent multiple notices to the address on file." "I never received those notices," I explained, struggling to keep frustration from my voice. "My husband intercepted them. He forged my signature on the loan application. I had no knowledge of this account until yesterday." "I sympathize with your situation, Mrs. Reynolds, but from our perspective, both signatures are on the application. You're jointly liable for the debt." "But I didn't sign anything," I insisted. "It's fraud. If you believe fraud has been committed, you're welcome to file a police report and submit it to our fraud department for investigation. However, I should warn you that investigations typically take 60 to 90 days, during which time the account will continue to accrue interest and late fees." The implication was clear. Even if I could eventually prove fraud, the immediate financial pressure wouldn't ease. "What are my options in the meantime?" I asked, defeated. "We can offer a hardship repayment plan," the representative said, her tone softening slightly. "Reduced payments for 6 months, but interest will continue to accrue. You would need to make an initial good faith payment of $500 to activate the plan. $500. More than half of what remained in our joint account. But what choice did I have? I'll make the payment, I agreed, reaching for my credit card. Will this stop the collection calls and letters? As long as you maintain the agreed-upon payment schedule, yes. By the time I finished the call, having authorized the payment and received confirmation of the new arrangement, I felt hollow, drained of both energy and emotion. One account addressed, 4 more to go, and this had been the smallest of the balances. The second call went much like the first. Extended hold times, initial inflexibility, grudging accommodation only after. I agreed to an immediate payment I could ill afford. By the time I reached the twins' room, I had committed nearly all of our remaining funds to good faith payments on just 2 of the 5 fraudulent accounts. The simple physical demands of motherhood, changing diapers, wiping faces, preparing snacks, provided a welcome distraction from the financial quicksand pulling at my feet. For the next hour, I immersed myself in their world of simple needs and immediate gratifications. Madison arrived home from school just as I was setting up the twins with a puzzle on the living room floor. "Hey, Mom," she said quietly, dropping her backpack by the door. "How was your day?" The ordinary question, so at odds with our extraordinary circumstances, caught me off guard. How was my day? How could I possibly answer that? It was productive, I said finally, opting for partial truth. I made some calls about those bills. Started working out payment arrangements. Madison nodded, absorbing this information with the serious attention she'd been giving all adult matters since Denver's departure. That's good, right? Making arrangements? It's a start. She glanced at the twins, engrossed in their puzzle, then lowered her voice. Did you call the police? About the fraud? The directness of her question startled me. I hadn't explained the full nature of Denver's financial deception, but Madison had clearly drawn her own conclusions. Not yet, I admitted. It's complicated. If I report Denver for fraud, it starts a legal process that might eventually clear my name from those debts, but it would take months. And in the meantime, we still need to make payments to avoid further damage to our credit. So he gets away with it? Madison asked, incredulity and outrage mingling in her voice. That's not fair. No, it's not fair, I agreed, surprised by the level of composure I managed to maintain despite the roiling anger beneath my words. But right now, I need to focus on keeping a roof over our heads and food on the table. Justice might have to wait. Madison's brow furrowed, clearly dissatisfied with this answer but unwilling to press the issue. I'm going to start my homework, she said after a moment. Call me if you need help with the twins. I watched her climb the stairs, shoulders slightly slumped under the weight of concerns no 12-year-old should have to carry. This, perhaps more than any other aspect of Denver's betrayal, fueled my simmering rage. He hadn't just abandoned me, he had abandoned Madison in the most fundamental way, destroying her sense of security and trust at a vulnerable age. At 4:30 p.m., my cell phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a Tampa area code. Mrs. Reynolds? This is Terrence Baker from Florida First Credit Union. I'm calling regarding your personal loan account, which is currently 45 days past due. Another creditor, one I hadn't even had a chance to call yet. I excused myself, asking Madison to watch the twins for a few minutes. Mr. Baker, I began, summoning what little energy I had left. I only learned about this loan yesterday. My husband took it out without my knowledge and has subsequently abandoned our family. I'm trying to address all these accounts, but I'm dealing with 5 separate fraudulent debts he left behind. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I see, he said finally, his tone shifting from professional detachment to something more human. That's a challenging situation, Mrs. Reynolds. You have no idea, I murmured, exhaustion seeping into my voice. What followed surprised me. Instead of the standard script about liability and payment options, Mr. Baker, Terrence, offered genuine assistance. He explained which documentation I would need to contest the debt, outlined the specific hardship programs their institution offered, and even suggested community resources that might provide emergency financial assistance. The key is to act quickly, he advised. The longer these accounts remain delinquent, the fewer options you'll have. I can place a temporary hold on collection activities for your account, 30 days. to give you time to gather documentation and apply for the hardship program. But you'll need to submit everything before that window closes. I scribbled notes frantically, pathetically grateful for this unexpected guidance. Thank you, I said when he finished. You have no idea how helpful this is. I've seen situations like yours before, Terrence said, his voice gentle. Not exactly the same, of course, but financial abandonment is unfortunately common. The most important thing is to advocate for yourself consistently and keep detailed records of every conversation, payment, and agreement. After the call ended, I stood in the kitchen, staring at my notes, a fragile sense of hope emerging from the chaos. One person, one stranger, had treated me with empathy and respect, had offered practical help instead of bureaucratic obstacles. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of our problems, but it was something. A reminder that not everyone was an enemy, that support could come from unexpected sources. Dinner that evening was Frida's casserole, a home-style chicken and rice dish that the twins devoured enthusiastically and Madison picked at without complaint. I barely tasted it, my mind occupied with planning the next day's tasks, more creditor calls, research on emergency assistance programs, a visit to the bank to discuss the mortgage. After the twins were bathed and in bed, their nightly requests for Daddy's story diminishing but still present, I found Madison sitting at the kitchen table, Denver's laptop open in front of her. "What are you doing?" I asked, surprised. "I thought that was broken." She didn't look up from the screen. "It's not broken. Denver just said it was because he didn't want us using it." I moved closer, curious despite my exhaustion. "How do you know that?" "Because I saw him using it last month," she replied matter-of-factly. "He shut it really fast when I came into the room and claimed he was just retrieving some old file." The screen showed a login prompt, requiring a password I didn't know. "Can you get into it?" Madison shook her head, frustration evident in her expression. "Not yet. I've tried some obvious passwords, but no luck. I thought maybe it would have information about where Denver went, or about the money." I sank into the chair beside her, oddly comforted by her straightforward approach to our situation. While I had spent the day negotiating with creditors and calculating bills, Madison had been tackling the mystery from another angle entirely. "That's good thinking," I said, studying the login screen. "Denver must have kept records somewhere. He was always so organized about finances. At least I thought he was." "Do you know any passwords he might have used?" Madison asked. "For other accounts or devices?" I considered this, trying to remember the rare occasions when Denver had shared login information with me. He used Lighthouse 2015 for his work laptop once, when I needed to pay a bill while he was sick. It was the year we visited that lighthouse in Maine. Madison's fingers flew over the keyboard, entering the password. The screen flashed red with an access denied message. "Maybe a variation?" she suggested, undeterred. "Lighthouse 2015, with an exclamation point, or all capitals." We spent the next hour systematically trying variations of known passwords, significant dates, and personal information that Denver might have used. Each attempt was met with the same frustrating result: access denied. "We'll figure it out," Madison said finally, closing the laptop as the clock approached her bedtime. "Detective Polly always says that people create patterns without realizing it. Denver must have patterns too. We just need to find them." Her confidence, her determination to solve this puzzle, stirred something in me. A reminder that we weren't helpless victims of Denver's betrayal, but active participants in our own recovery. Denver had deliberately left us in the dark, but Madison's instinct was to turn on the lights, to seek information, to refuse the passive role he had assigned us in his exit strategy. "You're right," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead in a gesture she usually protested as too babyish but now accepted without complaint. "We'll keep trying. Together." After Madison went to bed, I returned to the kitchen table, spreading out my notes from the day's creditor calls, reviewing the meager progress I'd made. 5 fraudulent accounts, 2 partially addressed with hardship, payment plans that would stretch our non-existent budget to the breaking point, a mortgage payment looming in less than 2 weeks with no obvious source of funds to cover it, childcare costs that would consume any additional income I might generate by working more hours. It was an impossible equation, a problem with no viable solution that I could see. And yet, as I sat in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by evidence of Denver's betrayal, I felt a strange, steely resolve taking shape alongside my fear and anger. Denver had orchestrated this crisis with meticulous care, counting on my confusion and distress to complete his clean escape. He had calculated that I would be too overwhelmed by immediate needs to effectively pursue him or hold him accountable. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the practical demands of survival would consume all my energy and attention in the coming weeks and months. But watching Madison attack the mystery of Denver's password with methodical determination had reminded me of something important. We had resources Denver hadn't accounted for: intelligence, persistence, and most crucially, a sense of justice that demanded satisfaction. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Denver had underestimated us, especially Madison. And that mistake would eventually cost him everything. A week after Denver's disappearance, reality crashed down with the force of a tidal wave. The mortgage payment was due in 10 days. The refrigerator contained enough food for maybe 3 more days. The twins needed new shoes. The joint account Denver mentioned in his letter, the one that was supposed to cover a month of expenses, contained exactly $843.17, barely enough for a week of necessities. I sat at the kitchen table after putting all 3 kids to bed, staring at my laptop screen, trying to make the numbers work. They wouldn't. No matter how I moved things around, cut expenses, or prioritized payments, there simply wasn't enough money to cover our basic needs, let alone begin addressing the mountain of debt Denver had left behind. My part-time position at the library paid $16.50 an hour for 20 hours a week, enough to supplement our family income when Denver was bringing in the bulk of our money, but nowhere near sufficient to support a household of 4 on my own. I'd have to find a full-time job immediately, but that would mean paying for childcare for the twins, it was a trap with no visible escape. A soft noise at the doorway made me look up. Madison stood there in her pajamas, watching me with those perceptive eyes. "You should be in bed," I said, trying to inject normalcy into my voice. "I heard you. Crying?" she replied simply. Had I been crying? I touched my cheek and found it wet. I hadn't even noticed. "I'm just tired," I lied, closing the laptop. Madison walked over and sat beside me. "The money's gone, isn't it? All of it." There seemed little point in pretending. "Yes, and we have bills due that we can't pay." She nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "Are we going to lose the house?" The directness of her question knocked the air from my lungs. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen." Madison saw through it immediately. "That means maybe." "It means I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm going to figure it out." "We could find Denver and make him come back," she suggested. The simplicity of a 12-year-old solution, striking in its clarity. Even if we could find him, and that's a big if, we can't make him do anything he doesn't want to do. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "But it's not fair," Madison protested, a rare glimpse of the child beneath her composed exterior. "He can't just leave us with nothing." "You're right, it's not fair," I agreed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "But we can't count on him to fix this. We have to focus on what we can control." "Which is what?" I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. "First, I need to find a better paying job. Then we need to see if we can negotiate with the bank about the mortgage and with the credit card companies about the debt payments, and we'll need to be very careful with money for a while." Madison processed this, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I have $212 in my savings account," she offered. "From birthdays and babysitting, you can have it." The gesture nearly broke me. My 12-year-old daughter offering her life savings to help keep our family afloat. "That's very generous, sweetie, but your money is yours," I said, voice thick with emotion. "You earned it, and you should keep it." "What's the point of saving money if you can't use it when you really need it?" she countered with implacable logic. "Besides, I'm part of this family too." I pulled her into a hug, overwhelmed by her maturity and generosity. "Thank you. But let's call that our emergency backup plan, okay? Let me try some other things first." She nodded against my shoulder, then pulled back, her expression shifting to something more determined. "We should still try to find Denver, though." I sighed, too exhausted to argue. "Madison, not to make him come back," she clarified quickly. but to make him pay child support. That's the law, right? Even if parents divorce, they have to support their kids. Her clarity cut through my emotional fog. She was right, of course. Denver had legal obligations to his children, regardless of his feelings about our marriage. If I could find him, I could potentially secure court-ordered support. Payments. That's a good point, I conceded. But finding someone who doesn't want to be found isn't easy. And hiring a private investigator costs money we don't have. Madison's eyes lit up. We don't need to hire anyone. We can do it ourselves. Sweetie, real-life investigation isn't like your detective movies. I know that, she said, a hint of impatience in her voice. But the basic principles are the same. Follow the evidence. Look for patterns. Think about motivation and opportunity. Instead of answering immediately, she left the room. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, then rummaging from the direction of my bedroom. Before I could follow, she returned with Denver's laptop. The old one he'd claimed had stopped working months ago. Start with this, she said, placing it on the table. Denver always said it was broken, but I saw him using it last month when his new one was charging. He shut it really fast when I came into the room. I stared at the laptop, a chill running through me. You're sure about this? She nodded emphatically. 100%. And he had it password protected, which seemed weird for something that was supposedly broken. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the laptop. The screen illuminated immediately. No signs of damage. A password prompt appeared, mocking me with its simplicity and implications. Denver had deliberately kept this device secret, actively lying about its functionality. Do you know the password? I asked. Madison shook her head. But I know he always used the same few passwords for everything. His banking password was Mason's birthday plus Will's birthday, 03212020. Maybe try that? I typed it in. Access denied. What? About your anniversary? She suggested. I entered the date, 06152009. Nothing. His brother's birthday? Madison persisted. Or maybe that trip you guys took to Maui, the one he always talked about? One by one, we tried the significant dates in Denver's life. Each attempt was met with the same response. Incorrect password. After the 10th failed attempt, a warning appeared on the screen. One more incorrect entry would lock the device permanently. Stop, I said, pulling my hands away. We can't risk losing access completely. There must be another way. Madison bit her lip, thinking. What about his email? Can we reset the password through that? Maybe if we knew which email he used for this laptop. Denver had multiple accounts. The statement, Madison said suddenly, snapping her fingers. The credit card statement in the trash had his email address on it. It wasn't his usual one. I noticed that. She darted to the kitchen trash, already emptied and relined, then looked up at me with dismay. It's gone. The garbage pickup was this morning, I confirmed, heart sinking. Madison wasn't deterred. But I remember part of it. It started with Phoenix something, like the city in Arizona. A memory stirred. Phoenix Rising, I murmured. It's a phrase he used sometimes. Said it was about transformation and new beginnings. Phoenix Rising, Madison repeated. We should try both Gmail and Outlook. I opened a browser on my phone and attempted to log into Gmail with the address phoenixrisingeggmail.com. The account existed, but of course, we didn't have the password. Try the password reset option, Madison urged. Maybe the recovery email or phone number will give us a clue. I clicked Forgot Password. The recovery options appeared. A partially hidden email address and phone number. Recovery email, cnr.com, recovery phone. If you see something, Madison said. Could be your email, Mom, Colleen. My pulse quickened. And that last phone digit, my number ends in 42, not 52. But Denver's cell ends in 52, Madison pointed out. He used his own phone as the recovery option. The implications were clear. Denver had created this secret email account and linked it to his personal devices, deliberately keeping it separate from our shared life. We can request a reset code to his phone, I said, but that doesn't help us since he has his phone with him. Madison's face fell momentarily, but then brightened. What about his Google account? If he used it on other devices in the house, maybe. A sudden wail from upstairs interrupted her. One of the twins, Mason, by the pitch of the cry, had woken. Up. I'll go, Madison said immediately, already heading for the stairs. You keep working on this. As she disappeared upstairs, I sat back, mind racing. In less than an hour, my 12-year-old daughter had demonstrated more initiative and insight than I had managed in a week of numbing panic. She hadn't just offered sympathy. She'd started formulating a plan, identifying resources, actively problem-solving. The realization was both humbling and energizing. I wasn't alone in this fight, and maybe, with Madison's unexpected help, I could find a way through this nightmare. 1 week after Denver's disappearance, the thin veneer of composure I'd maintained for the children's sake finally shattered. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening, exactly 7 days since I'd woken to find him gone. The twins were in bed after an especially difficult day of tantrums and tears. Madison was in her room, likely continuing her determined efforts to crack Denver's laptop password. I stood in our bedroom, my bedroom now, staring at Denver's side of the closet, at the empty spaces where his favorite clothes had hung, at the few items he'd deemed unworthy of taking to his new life. A faded college sweatshirt, the Christmas sweater my mother had given him, the worn running shoes he'd kept, just in case. Something about those abandoned possessions broke something loose inside me. I sank to the floor, back against the bed, and finally allowed myself the luxury of complete collapse. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, tearing through my chest with physical force. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to contain the storm of grief and rage that threatened to sweep me away entirely. For the first time since Denver's betrayal, I wasn't crying just from shock or fear or the overwhelming magnitude of our practical problems. I was mourning. Mourning the death of a marriage I had believed in completely. Mourning the loss of the future we had planned together. How could you? I whispered to the empty room. How could you look at your children's faces and still walk away? How could you plan this for months, smiling and lying, making love to me, reading bedtime stories to the twins, helping Madison with her science project? I don't know how long I sat there before becoming aware of a soft sound at the doorway. Madison stood watching me, her face pale in the dim light from the hallway. Mom? She ventured, her voice. I tried to compose myself, to hide the depth of my breakdown from my child who needed me to be strong. But it was too late. She had seen me at my most vulnerable. I'm okay, I lied, wiping ineffectually at my tears. Just having a moment. I'll be fine. Madison didn't respond immediately. Instead, she crossed the room and sat beside me on the floor, her shoulder pressing against mine in silent solidarity. For several minutes, we simply sat together, my occasional sobs gradually subsiding. You don't have to pretend for me, she said finally. I know this is really bad. I know you're scared. The simple acknowledgement pierced through the last of my protective barriers. I am scared, I admitted. I don't know how we're going to manage, Madison. The mortgage? The debt? The twins' needs? It's overwhelming, she nodded, accepting this truth without panic. I'm scared too, but not as much as before. Before? When I first realized Denver was gone for real. That first day, I thought maybe you'd leave too. That it would be too hard with all of us and you'd need to send us away or something. The admission stunned me. Madison, no. Never. You and the twins are everything to me. We're a family. I know that now, she said simply. I've been watching you this week, making all those calls, figuring out the money stuff, taking care of the twins even when you're super tired. You're not giving up. Her perception humbled me. No, I'm not giving up, I confirmed. But that doesn't mean I'm not terrified. Madison considered this, her face solemn in the half-light. Detective Polly says fear is just information. It tells you there's danger, but it doesn't tell you what to do about it. That part is up to you. I couldn't help but smile slightly through my tears. Your detective shows are quite philosophical. Sometimes, she agreed with a small shrug. But they're right, aren't they? We're scared because this is scary. But being scared doesn't have to stop us from figuring it out. When did you get so wise? I asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Probably around the time my stepdad turned out to be a lying jerk who stole our money, she replied with unexpected dryness that startled a laugh from me. The sound of my own laughter, rusty and surprising, seemed to release something tight and painful in my chest. "I have something to show you," Madison said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a folded sheet of notebook paper and handed it to me. I opened it to find a meticulously drawn chart titled Family Budget Plan. In Madison's neat handwriting were categories: housing, food, utilities, twins' needs, emergency fund, with estimated expenses and potential sources of income, including Mom's library job, more hours, and Madison's babysitting money, $212.75. "I've been working on it for a few days," she explained, a hint of pride in her voice. "I thought it might help to see everything written down." I stared at the paper, at my daughter's careful calculations and thoughtful categorizations. She had even created a small section labeled Fun Money 20 to month, with a note, "Everyone needs a little joy." "Madison," I said, my voice thick with fresh tears, "this is incredible, and that you would offer your savings." She shrugged, embarrassed by my emotion. "It's not that much, but I've been thinking, I could babysit more if I put up flyers in the neighborhood, and I could mow lawns in the summer." I pulled her into a fierce hug. "Your money is yours," I told her firmly. "You earned it and you should keep it." "But that's not how family works, is it?" she countered. "Denver thought he could just leave, that his responsibility was optional. But real family means we take care of each other, especially when things are hard." Her words hit me with unexpected force. In the midst of my grief and fear, I had been thinking of myself as suddenly alone, a single mother bearing the entire weight of our family's needs. But Madison was right. We were still a family. Different, wounded, but fundamentally connected in ways Denver had failed to honor or understand. "You're right," I acknowledged. "We do take care of each other, but there are appropriate ways for you to help that don't involve giving me your savings." We talked about ways she could contribute, helping with the twins, researching assistance, programs we might qualify for, making a list of resources and deadlines. Her face lit up at these concrete, meaningful tasks. We sat together for a while longer, the desperate grief that had overwhelmed me earlier gradually replaced by a quiet, sad determination. Nothing had changed about our practical circumstances, but something had shifted in how I perceived our situation. We weren't just victims of Denver's betrayal. We were active participants in our own recovery, a team facing challenges together. "We should get some sleep," I said eventually, noticing Madison trying to suppress a yawn. "Tomorrow's going to be another long day." At the doorway, she paused, turning back to me. "Mom, Denver was wrong about us. He thought we'd fall apart without him. But we're stronger than he knew." After she left, I remained on the floor, her budget plan still clutched in my hand, her words echoing in my mind. We're stronger than he knew. The simple declaration contained a profound truth I had been too consumed by crisis to recognize. Denver had calculated his escape with cold precision, counting on our dependency and helplessness. What he had failed to calculate was our capacity for resilience, for adaptation, for growth under pressure. He had underestimated Madison's intelligence and determination. He had underestimated my resourcefulness and courage. He had underestimated the fundamental strength of the bond between mother and children, a bond that, unlike his commitment, could not be severed by convenience or self-interest. As I finally prepared for bed, exhausted but somehow lighter than I had felt in days, I made a silent promise to myself and my children. Denver would not define our story. His betrayal was a chapter, not the conclusion. Whatever came next would be written not by his absence but by our presence, our determination, our love for each other, our refusal to be diminished by his abandonment. We were, indeed, stronger than he knew, and it was time we proved it, to ourselves, to the world, and eventually, perhaps, to the man who had so grievously underestimated the family he left behind. The morning after my breakdown, I woke with swollen eyes but a clearer mind. Madison's budget plan lay on my nightstand where I'd placed it before finally falling into an exhausted sleep. Looking at it in the cold light of morning, I was struck anew by her methodical approach to our crisis. The careful categories, the thoughtful allocations, the realistic assessment of our situation. In some ways, her plan was more coherent than my own scattered efforts had been. While I had been reacting, putting out the most immediate fires, negotiating with the most demanding creditors, Madison had been thinking systematically, creating a framework for longer-term stability. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. The twins were already awake, their cheerful babble carrying through the baby monitor as they conversed in their cribs, blissfully unaware of the financial abyss we teetered on the edge of. Their resilience was different from Madison's, not conscious determination, but the simple, animal instinct of very young children to adapt to their circumstances, to find joy in the present moment, regardless of adult concerns. As I dressed for the day, I found myself drawing strength from both forms of resilience. Madison's clear-eyed problem-solving and the twins' untroubled embrace of each new day. They were all looking to me for stability, for guidance, for protection. I couldn't afford another collapse, no matter how justified or temporary. Downstairs, I found Madison already in the kitchen, laptop open on the table, a notebook and pen beside it. She was still in her pajamas, hair uncombed, but her expression was one of intense concentration. "Good morning," I said, moving to start the coffee maker. "You're up early." She glanced up briefly, offering a distracted smile. "I'm researching assistance programs like we talked about last night. There's a lot of information to sort through." The sight of her, so earnestly focused on helping our family, filled me with a complex mixture of pride, gratitude, and sadness. No 12-year-old should have to spend their morning researching financial assistance rather than texting friends or watching cartoons. But Madison had chosen this role, had actively sought ways to contribute to our survival. To dismiss her efforts out of some misguided desire to preserve her childhood would be to deny her agency, her legitimate place in our family's recovery. "Find anything promising?" I asked, joining her at the table with my coffee. She nodded enthusiastically. "Actually, yes. There's an emergency assistance program through the county that provides one-time grants for families in sudden financial crisis. The maximum is $2,500, and it's specifically for housing costs or utility bills. We'd need to document the crisis. Denver's abandonment would qualify, and prove financial need, which shouldn't be hard." I blinked, impressed by the specificity of her research. "That could cover 2 months of utilities and help with groceries. That's significant. There's more," she continued, warming to her subject. "The state has a program called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF. It provides cash assistance to families with dependent children when a parent is absent from the home. The application process is more involved, and there are work requirements for the remaining parent, but you already work, so that shouldn't be an issue." She flipped to a new page in her notebook, revealing more neatly organized notes. "And then there's SNAP benefits, food stamps, which we probably qualify for now. And the twins might be eligible for free childcare through the early learning coalition, which would help if you need to work more hours." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. In a single evening, Madison had compiled more actionable information about assistance programs than I had managed to find in a week of crisis management. "Madison, this is incredible," I said finally. "You've done more research than most adults would know how to do." She shrugged, but I could see she was pleased by the praise. "It's just like researching for a school project. You start with the main search terms, then follow the links to the most official-looking websites, then look for the specific information you need." "Well, you're very good at it," I said, squeezing her shoulder gratefully. "This gives us a real starting point. I made a list of application requirements for each program," she continued, turning to yet another page in her notebook. "Most of them need proof of income, identification for all family members, and documentation of the crisis situation. For Denver's abandonment, they usually want a police report or court documents." The mention of official documentation brought me back to the practical challenges we still faced. I hadn't filed a police report about Denver's disappearance, partly because I wasn't sure it qualified as a crime. Adults are legally allowed to leave their families, however morally reprehensible the act might be, and partly because I'd been too overwhelmed by immediate financial concerns to add another task to my list. But Madison's research made it clear. Without formal documentation of Denver's abandonment, we would struggle to access many of the assistance programs that could help sustain us through this crisis. "I should file a police report today," I said, thinking aloud. Not just for the assistance applications, but also to create an official record of when Denver left and the circumstances surrounding his departure. That could be important for any future legal proceedings. Like divorce? Madison asked, her tone deliberately neutral. I nodded, appreciating her directness. Yes, like divorce and child support proceedings. Denver may have walked away from his responsibilities, but the law doesn't allow parents to simply abandon their financial obligations to their children. But how do we make him pay child support if we don't know where he is? Madison asked, zeroing in on the practical challenge with her usual precision. It was a question I had been grappling with myself. That's one of the reasons for filing a police report, I explained. It initiates an official process. If Denver has left the state or the country, there are still legal mechanisms to establish and enforce child support obligations. But we need to start with formal documentation of the abandonment. Madison nodded, accepting this explanation. The Department of Children and Families might be able to help with child support enforcement, she said, flipping through her notebook again. They have a whole division dedicated to locating non-custodial parents and establishing support orders. Again, I was struck by the thoroughness of her research. That's exactly right. And the sooner we get that process started, the better. The twins' increasingly insistent calls from upstairs interrupted our discussion. I'll get them, Madison offered, closing her laptop. You finish your coffee and look through my notes. I think the emergency assistance program should be our first application. It has the fastest processing time. As she headed upstairs to retrieve her brothers, I sat at the kitchen table, paging through her meticulously organized notebook, marveling at the detailed information she had compiled. Beyond the specific programs and requirements, she had noted contact information, office locations, hours of operation, and even the names of specific departmental contacts when available. It was more than impressive. It was transformative. With Madison's research in hand, the path forward seemed suddenly less obscure, the mountain of challenges less insurmountable. We still had a long and difficult journey ahead, but at least now we had a map. By the time Madison returned with the twins, one balanced on each hip, a feat given their size and her slender frame, I had finished reviewing her notes and formulated a plan for the day. I'm going to call the police department after breakfast, I told her as I took Mason from her arms. Then I'll start on the emergency assistance application. If Frida can watch the twins this afternoon, maybe you and I can go to the Department of Children and Families together to get information about child support enforcement. Madison's face lit up at the suggestion of being included in this official errand. Really? You want me to come with you? Absolutely, I said sincerely. You've done the research. You understand the programs and requirements better than I do. At this point, you'd be a valuable partner. The word partner was deliberate, acknowledging her contribution while carefully avoiding placing inappropriate adult responsibility on her young shoulders. Madison wasn't my co-parent or my caretaker, but she was an intelligent, capable member of our family whose insights and efforts deserved recognition. Okay, she agreed, her smile brightening her face for a moment before she turned her attention to getting Will settled in his high chair. I'll make a list of questions we should ask while you make breakfast. The morning unfolded with a new sense of purpose and organization. After feeding and dressing the twins, I called the local police department to inquire about filing a report for family abandonment. The officer I spoke with was matter-of-fact but not unkind, explaining that while adults are legally permitted to leave their families, the abandonment of minor children without provision for their care could potentially constitute neglect. In this case, since you're present and caring for the children, it's not a child welfare issue, he clarified. But we can certainly take a report documenting the circumstances, which might be useful for civil proceedings related to divorce, custody, or support. We arranged for an officer to come to the house that afternoon to take my statement. One official step toward establishing the paper trail we would need for both assistance applications and eventual legal action against Denver. Next, I called Frida, who readily agreed to watch the twins while Madison and I visited the Department of Children and Families. Take all the time you need, she insisted. The boys are a delight, and I've got nothing but time these days. With childcare secured and the police report scheduled, I turned my attention to the emergency assistance application. Madison sat, Beside me at the kitchen table, the twins contentedly playing with blocks on the floor nearby as we navigated the online form together. It asks for verification of the crisis, Madison pointed out, reading from the screen. It says acceptable documentation includes police reports, court orders, medical statements, eviction notices, or utility disconnection notices. We'll have the police report by this afternoon, I noted, and I can upload the mortgage statement, showing the payment due next week, which we currently don't have funds to cover. Madison nodded approvingly. Perfect. That shows both the abandonment crisis and the immediate financial need. We continued through the application, Madison occasionally offering suggestions about how to phrase certain responses for maximum clarity. Her attention to detail was remarkable, catching potential issues I might have overlooked in my stressed and sleep-deprived state. There, I said finally, submitting the completed form. Now we wait. According to the website, they typically process emergency applications within 3 to 5 business days. That would be next week sometime, Madison calculated. The mortgage is due Monday, cutting it close. True, but remember, I applied for mortgage forbearance last week, I reminded her. Even if that's not approved immediately, most mortgage companies give a 15-day grace period before assessing late fees. We have a little breathing room, she nodded, accepting this logic. What about the SNAP application? Should we start that one now too? I glanced at the time. The officer would be arriving in less than an hour to take the police report, and we had our appointment at the Department of Children and Families later that afternoon. Let's focus on one thing at a time, I suggested. The emergency assistance was our priority because it's the fastest route to some financial relief. Let's get the police report filed, then learn more about child support enforcement this afternoon. Tomorrow we can tackle the SNAP application. Madison considered this, then nodded. That makes sense. Prioritizing by urgency and chronological order of steps. She closed her notebook decisively. I'm going to get dressed before the police officer comes. Should I wear something specific to look more, I don't know, official? The question, so earnest and so revealing of her desire to be taken seriously despite her age, tugged at my heart. Wear whatever makes you comfortable, I told her. But remember, you don't need to be part of the police report process if you don't want to be. That's something I can handle alone. She considered this, then shook her head. I want to be there. I should be there. I'm part of this family too. And Denver left all of us, not just you. Her determination was both admirable and concerning. While I valued her involvement and contributions, I worried about the emotional toll this crisis was taking on her. Madison had effectively lost the only father she had ever known, the man who had been in her life since she was a toddler, who had attended her school events, helped with homework, celebrated birthdays and holidays as part of our family unit. In her focus on practical solutions, on being strong and helpful, Madison had had little opportunity to process her own grief and sense of betrayal. Sooner or later, those emotions would demand acknowledgement, possibly in ways neither of us was prepared for. Madison, I said carefully, you know it's okay to be upset about Denver leaving, right? You don't have to be strong all the time, she stiffened slightly, her expression closing. I know that. I'm just saying, if you want to talk about how you're feeling, I don't, she interrupted, her voice firm. Not right now. Right now I want to help with the practical stuff. The feeling stuff can wait. I recognized the defense mechanism, the prioritization of action over emotion, of practical solutions over painful feelings. It was, after all, the same strategy I had been employing since Denver's disappearance. Focus on what can be fixed. Postpone processing what cannot. Okay, I conceded, respecting her boundaries. But whenever you do want to talk about the feeling stuff, I'm here. She nodded briefly, then headed upstairs to change. The conversation effectively closed. The police officer who arrived that afternoon was a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense manner, softened by kind eyes. Officer Bernadette Mitchell introduced herself at the door, then followed me into the living room, where I had set up a folder containing Denver's goodbye letter, the financial notices, and other documentation of his abandonment. Madison sat nearby, on the couch, the twins occupied with a cartoon in the adjacent playroom where she could keep an eye on them while still listening to our conversation. So you're reporting family abandonment, Officer Mitchell confirmed, opening her laptop. When exactly did your husband leave? Tuesday morning, May 15th, I replied. I woke up and he was gone, along with his suitcase and personal items. He left this note. I handed her Denver's letter, watching as she read it with professional detachment. "And these are the financial notices you mentioned on the phone?" she asked, gesturing to the stack of papers I had organized. I nodded, explaining each document, the fraudulent loan applications bearing what appeared to be my signature, the credit, card statements for accounts I had never seen, the empty savings account that had once contained our emergency fund, and the twins' college savings. Officer Mitchell took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates, amounts, and specific accounts. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something, anger, disgust, when I explained how Denver had forged my signature on multiple financial documents. "And your husband gave no indication he was planning to leave?" "No warnings, no previous threats of abandonment?" she asked. "None that I recognized at the time," I said truthfully. In retrospect, there were signs: increasing secretiveness about finances, more business trips, vague answers about our savings. But no, he never threatened to leave or express direct dissatisfaction with our marriage or family life. "The opposite, actually," Madison interjected from the couch. "He was always saying how lucky he was, how much he loved us. He bought the twins special presents for their birthday last month. He helped me with my science project 2 weeks before he left." Officer Mitchell turned toward Madison, her expression softening slightly. "And you are?" "Madison Carson," she replied with surprising composure. "I'm 12. Denver was, my stepfather since I was 2. He's the only father I've ever known." The simple statement, delivered without obvious emotion but laden with unspoken hurt, seemed to strike Officer Mitchell particularly. She nodded, making another note in her report. "The planning involved here is considerable," she observed, turning back to me. "The financial maneuvers, the timing of his departure, the calculated nature of his goodbye note. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision." "No," I agreed, the familiar anger rising again. "Denver planned this methodically, possibly for months. He created the maximum financial damage while ensuring his own clean escape. He knew exactly what he was doing." Officer Mitchell nodded, continuing to type. "And you have no idea where he might have gone? No family connections, friends, or locations he spoke about frequently?" I hesitated, considering. He mentioned his brother Evan living in Seattle, but they weren't close. At least that's what Denver told me. And he traveled to Las Vegas several times in the months before he left, supposedly for work. He had also shown interest in property in Costa Rica, but I thought it was just daydreaming about retirement someday. Madison's head snapped up at this last detail. "Costa Rica? You never mentioned that before." "It didn't seem important," I explained. "Just casual comments about beachfront property being a good investment. How wonderful it would be to retire, somewhere warm someday. Nothing that suggested immediate plans. Costa Rica is a popular destination for people looking to disappear," Officer Mitchell noted carefully. "Relatively low cost of living, beautiful scenery, and while it does have an extradition treaty with the U.S., enforcement can be complicated depending on the jurisdiction." Madison's expression sharpened with interest. "So he could be hiding there? To avoid consequences?" Officer Mitchell glanced at me, clearly weighing how to respond to a child's direct question about potentially criminal behavior. "It's one possibility, among many," she said diplomatically. "Your stepfather could be anywhere at this point. What's important is documenting his abandonment and the financial situation he left behind, which is what we're doing today." She returned to her questions, gathering additional details about Denver's employment, our financial accounts, and the specific circumstances of his departure. Throughout the interview, Madison remained attentive, occasionally offering details. I had forgotten or clarifying timeline issues when my recollection faltered. "You have a good memory," Officer Mitchell commented to her at one point. "That's helpful in situations like this." Madison straightened slightly at the professional acknowledgement. "I pay attention to details," she said simply, "and I remember important things." By the time Officer Mitchell finished taking our statement, nearly 2 hours had passed. She reviewed the report with me, confirming key details and ensuring all relevant information had been captured. "I'll file this today," she promised, closing her laptop. "You'll receive a copy by email for your records, which you can use for assistance applications, legal proceedings, or other official purposes. The report number is here. She handed me a card with the information written on it. What happens next? Madison asked from the couch. Will the police look for Denver? Officer Mitchell considered her response carefully. This is primarily a civil matter rather than a criminal one, she explained. Adults are legally permitted to leave their families, however morally questionable that choice might be. The financial aspects, the loans taken out in your mother's name without her knowledge, could potentially involve criminal fraud, but that would require a separate investigation and formal charges. So no one's going to look for him? Madison pressed, a hint of indignation in her voice. The abandonment itself isn't a crime, Officer Mitchell clarified gently. But this report establishes an official record of what happened, when it happened, and the circumstances involved. That's valuable for the civil processes that will follow: divorce proceedings, child support enforcement, financial recovery, efforts. She turned to me, her expression professionally compassionate. I would strongly encourage you to consult with a family law attorney as soon as possible. The abandonment and financial fraud aspects of your situation will require specialized legal guidance. I know, I acknowledged. That's on my list, as soon as I can figure out how to pay for legal representation. Many family law attorneys offer free initial consultations, Officer Mitchell suggested, and legal aid provides services for low-income individuals facing situations like yours. I can provide some contact information before I leave. This small kindness, the offering of specific actionable resources rather than vague sympathy, was exactly what I needed. That would be very helpful, I said gratefully. Thank you. As Officer Mitchell prepared to leave, she paused at the door, lowering her voice slightly. Off the record, I've seen cases like this before. Men who walk away from their responsibilities, who think they can simply disappear and leave their families to deal with the fallout. They usually make mistakes. They contact old friends, use credit cards, leave digital footprints. And when they do, there are consequences. She glanced toward Madison, who was now helping the twins clean up their toys in the playroom. Your daughter is remarkably composed and resourceful. Don't underestimate what she's capable of. Sometimes the key to solving these situations comes from unexpected sources. With that cryptic but encouraging observation, Officer Mitchell departed, leaving me with a case number, contact information for legal resources, and a strange new sense of momentum. The police report wouldn't directly solve our financial crisis or locate Denver, but it represented the first official acknowledgement of our situation, the first concrete step toward whatever justice might eventually be possible. As I closed the door behind Officer Mitchell, Madison emerged from the playroom, the twins trailing behind her. What did she mean about me being resourceful? She asked, making it clear she had overheard the officer's parting comments. I think she was impressed by you, I said honestly. By your memory, your attention to detail, your composure during a difficult conversation. I certainly was. Madison absorbed this, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. She thinks I could help find Denver, doesn't she? The directness of the question caught me off guard. I'm not sure that's exactly what she meant. It is, Madison insisted. She said, the key to solving these situations sometimes comes from unexpected sources. She was looking at me when she said it. She thinks I could help track him down. I hesitated, uncertain how to respond. On one hand, I didn't want to encourage unrealistic expectations or inappropriate responsibility. Madison was 12 years old. Finding her fugitive stepfather was not and should not be her job. On the other hand, dismissing her insights or capabilities outright felt equally wrong, especially given how valuable her contributions had already proven. I think, I said carefully, that Officer Mitchell recognizes what I'm coming to see myself, that you have exceptional analytical skills and determination. But Madison, finding Denver, if that's even possible or advisable at this point, is not your responsibility. It's something for adults to handle through proper legal channels. Madison studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she simply nodded, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, before turning her attention back to the twins. We should get ready for our appointment at the Department of Children and Families, she said, effectively changing the subject. It's in an hour, and we still need to get the twins ready for Frida. I let the matter drop, recognizing that pushing further would only entrench whatever private thoughts Madison was harboring. But as I helped gather supplies for the twins' afternoon with Frida, I couldn't shake Officer Mitchell's parting words or Madison's keen interest in them. The seed of an idea had been planted in my daughter's mind, a dangerous, intriguing possibility that I suspected would not be easily dismissed. Frida arrived promptly at 1:30 p.m., greeting the twins with the warm enthusiasm of a grandmother delighted by unexpected time with her grandchildren. "We're going to have a wonderful afternoon," she assured them, already pulling small toys from her bag that she'd brought specifically for their entertainment. "Maybe we'll bake cookies if your mama says it's okay." "That would be fine," I agreed, grateful beyond words for her kindness. "There's milk in the fridge, and their favorite cups are in the lower cabinet. They usually nap around 3, but they might skip it today with all the excitement." Frida waved away my instructions good-naturedly. "We'll be just fine. You and Madison take care of your business without worrying about these little ones. We'll have a grand time, won't we, boys?" Mason nodded enthusiastically, already captivated by the colorful spinning top Frida had produced from her seemingly magical bag. Will, slightly more cautious, remained by my side until I assured him I would return soon. "Be good for Frida," I told them, kissing each tousled head. "Mama and Madison will be back before dinner." As Madison and I drove to the Department of Children and Families office, I was struck by her unusually quiet demeanor. Typically buzzing with observations or questions, she sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window with an intensity that suggested her mind was working through complicated problems. "Everything okay?" I asked finally, breaking the silence. "You're very quiet." She turned toward me, her expression serious. "I'm thinking about what Officer Mitchell said, about Denver making mistakes that could help us find him." I sighed internally, having hoped the subject was temporarily set aside. "Madison, finding Denver isn't our immediate priority. Right now, we need to focus on stabilizing our situation, securing assistance, establishing child support if possible, figuring out our long-term financial plan." "But what if finding Denver is the fastest way to fix our problems?" she countered. "If we know where he is, we can make him pay child support, make him take responsibility for the fraudulent loans, maybe even get back some of the money he took." Her logic wasn't entirely wrong, which made the conversation more challenging. In an ideal world, locating Denver would indeed lead to proper accountability and financial restitution. But the reality of international flight, complex legal jurisdictions, and the time and resources required to pursue someone who didn't want to be found made her proposition far more complicated than she realized. "It's not that simple," I tried to explain. "Even if we managed to locate Denver, which would be extremely difficult without resources we don't currently have, enforcing legal judgments across state lines or international boundaries is complicated and time-consuming. There's no quick fix here, sweetheart." Madison absorbed this, her brow furrowed in thought. "But it's not impossible, right? People get found. Criminals get caught. There are systems for this." "Yes, there are systems," I acknowledged. "Legal systems, law enforcement systems, international cooperation agreements. But those systems take time to work, and they're designed to be operated by professionals with specific training and authority. Like Officer Mitchell," Madison said thoughtfully. "But she said she's not going to look for Denver because abandonment isn't a crime." "That's correct. The police aren't going to actively search for Denver based on our report today. That's why we're going to the Department of Children and Families to start the process of establishing child support, which includes mechanisms for locating non-custodial parents." This explanation seemed to satisfy Madison temporarily. "So they'll look for him? The Department of Children and Families?" "They have resources for locating parents who owe child support," I confirmed. "But again, it's a process that takes time, especially in cases where someone may have left the country." Madison nodded slowly, processing this information. "Okay, I understand." But something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by the official channels I was describing. Before I could press further, we arrived at the Department of Children and Families office, a nondescript government building in a commercial area of Tampa. Inside, we were directed to the Child Support Enforcement Division, where we joined several other individuals waiting in plastic chairs arranged around the perimeter of a sparse reception area. Madison sat beside me, notebook open on her lap, pen poised to record important information. The professional demeanor she had adopted for this outing, khaki pants, a neat button-down shirt, hair pulled back in a tidy ponytail, would have been almost comical if it weren't so touching in its earnestness. "Remember," I said quietly, "we're here to gather information about the process, not to file a formal application yet. We still need to complete the documentation Officer Mitchell is preparing." Madison nodded seriously. "I have a list of questions." She tilted her notebook so I could see the neatly written items. How does child support amount get decided? What if the non-custodial parent is hiding? Can child support be collected from out of state or country? How long does the process take? Is there emergency child support while waiting? Her thoroughness continued to impress me. These were exactly the questions we needed answered, framed with a clarity many adults would struggle to achieve. After a 30-minute wait, we were called to a small office where a caseworker named Polly Harris greeted us with efficient professionalism. She was a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on a chain around her neck, the kind, a veteran civil servant who had likely seen every possible family situation in her career. "I understand you're seeking information about establishing child support for children whose father has abandoned the family," she said, consulting the intake form I had completed upon arrival. "3 minor children, is that correct?" "Yes," I confirmed. "My daughter Madison is 12, and my twin sons Mason and Will are 3. Ms. Harris nodded, making a note in her file. "And the father left on May 15th of this year, just over a week ago?" "That's right. He left without warning, leaving behind significant debt in both our names and no financial support for the children." "I see." Ms. Harris's expression remained neutral, though I detected a hint of familiar weariness, the resignation of someone who had heard similar stories too many times. "Have you filed for divorce?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I've been focused on immediate financial survival first, but I have filed a police report documenting the abandonment, which I'm told can be used to initiate child support proceedings even without a divorce filing." "That's correct," Ms. Harris confirmed. "Child support and divorce are separate legal matters, though they often proceed concurrently. In cases of abandonment, we can establish temporary support orders pending formal divorce proceedings." Madison, who had been listening intently, checked off something in her notebook. "So we don't have to wait for a divorce to get child support?" she asked, her voice clear and professional. Ms. Harris turned toward her with mild surprise, then a small smile of approval. "That's right, young lady. Child support is the right of the child, independent of the parent's marital status." Encouraged by this direct acknowledgement, Madison consulted her list. "How is the amount of child support determined?" "Florida uses the income shares model," Ms. Harris explained, seamlessly shifting into an educational tone appropriate for Madison's question. "It calculates support based on both parents' incomes and the number of children. Since your father's current income might be unknown, the court can impute income based on his last known employment or earning capacity." "What does impute mean?" Madison asked, pen poised over her notebook. "It means to assign a value when the actual amount isn't known," Ms. Harris explained. "For example, if your father was earning $75,000 annually before he left, the court would likely use that figure to calculate his support obligation, even if we don't know what he's earning now." Madison nodded, jotting notes with impressive speed. "And what if he's hiding? How do you find him to make him pay?" Ms. Harris glanced at me briefly, perhaps gauging whether this line of questioning was appropriate for a 12-year-old. Seeing no objection from me, I was, in fact, curious about the same issues. She continued. "The child support program has several tools for locating non-custodial parents," she explained. "We can access federal and state databases, including tax records, employment information, property ownership, driver's licenses, and bank accounts. We also work with other states through the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act if the parent has moved across state lines." "What about other countries?" Madison pressed. "Like if he went to Costa Rica?" Ms. Harris's eyebrows rose slightly at the specificity of the question. "International cases are more complex," she acknowledged. "The U.S. has reciprocal agreements with many countries, including Costa Rica, through the Hague Convention on International Recovery of Child Support. However, enforcement across international boundaries typically takes longer and may be less consistent. Madison frowned slightly, clearly disappointed by this answer. So even if you find him in another country, you might not be able to make him pay. I wouldn't say might not be able, Ms. Harris clarified. Rather, it may take longer and require additional legal procedures. International cases often involve cooperation between government agencies in both countries, which adds complexity and time to the process. This pragmatic assessment seemed to confirm Madison's suspicions about the limitations of official channels. She made another note, then asked, "How long does all this usually take? Finding the parent and getting them to pay?" "Timelines vary significantly based on individual circumstances," Ms. Harris said carefully. "In straightforward cases where the non-custodial parent is cooperative and easily located, support orders can be established within a few months. In more complex situations involving concealment, international residence, or active resistance, the process can take considerably longer." "Is there emergency support while waiting?" Madison asked, consulting her final listed question. "Since we need money now, not months from now." The directness of the question, combined with the obvious concern behind it, seemed to touch Ms. Harris. Her professional demeanor softened slightly. The child support program itself doesn't provide emergency financial assistance. However, there are other programs designed for immediate needs. She reached into her desk drawer and retrieved several pamphlets: temporary assistance for needy families, SNAP benefits, emergency housing assistance. These programs can help bridge the gap while the child support case progresses. "We've already applied for emergency assistance," Madison informed her with a hint of pride. "And we're researching TANF and SNAP. But none of those make Denver pay his fair share." Ms. Harris nodded, a hint of approval in her expression. "You're absolutely right. Those programs provide necessary support, but they don't replace the non-custodial parent's legal obligation. That's why the child support program exists, to ensure children receive financial support from both parents, regardless of the parent's relationship status." Throughout this exchange, I had remained largely silent, allowing Madison to ask her prepared questions and absorb the information firsthand. The conversation had confirmed much of what I had suspected. Establishing child support would be a lengthy process, particularly given Denver's likely international flight, and immediate financial relief would need to come from assistance programs rather than enforcement actions against him. "What documentation will we need to begin the formal child support process?" I asked, bringing the conversation back to practical next steps. Ms. Harris turned her attention to me, listing the required documents: birth certificates for all three children, our marriage certificate, the police report documenting abandonment, my income verification, Denver's last known employment information, and any available details about his current whereabouts. Once we have completed the intake process, our location services will begin searching for Mr. Reynolds using the federal and state databases I mentioned earlier, she explained. If he's using his Social Security number for employment, banking, or property transactions, we have a good chance of finding him eventually. The word eventually hung in the air, highlighting the fundamental disconnection between our urgent need and the deliberate pace of official proceedings. Denver had orchestrated his escape with careful attention to immediate consequences, ensuring that by the time formal processes caught up with him, he would be well established in his new life, perhaps with assets securely hidden or protected by international barriers. As we concluded our meeting, Ms. Harris provided a packet of forms to begin the child support application process once we had gathered all necessary documentation. "Complete these as thoroughly as possible," she advised. "The more information we have about Mr. Reynolds, his employment history, known associates, family connections, recent activities, the more effectively our location services can work." Madison took the packet, already scanning the forms with intense concentration. "Thank you for answering all my questions," she said politely. "It was very informative." Ms. Harris smiled, clearly charmed by Madison's mature demeanor. "You're very welcome. It's refreshing to see a young person so engaged in understanding these processes. Many adults find them overwhelming." As we left the office and walked to the car, I noticed Madison's thoughtful expression, the slight furrow in her brow that indicated she was processing everything we had learned, and perhaps reaching conclusions I might not anticipate or endorse. "What Are you thinking? I asked carefully as we settled into the car. I'm thinking, she replied slowly, that the official way is really slow and complicated and might not even work if Denver is smart about hiding. I couldn't disagree with her assessment. That's true, but it's still the proper channel, the legal process we need to follow. But what if there are other ways? Madison persisted. Not instead of the official way, but alongside it, ways that might be faster or more direct. Such as? I prompted, both curious and wary of where her thoughts might be leading. She hesitated, organizing her thoughts before responding. Well, Officer Mitchell said people like Denver make mistakes. They leave traces, digital footprints, and Ms. Harris said they use databases to find people, which means information is out there if you know where to look. I began to see where she was heading. Madison, accessing those databases requires legal authority. It's not something private citizens can just do. I know that, she said quickly, but there's still lots of information available to regular people if they know how to find it. Public records, social media, online directories. She paused, then added with careful emphasis. Detective Polly uses those all the time to find people who don't want to be found. Detective Polly is a fictional character, I reminded her gently. And even in those shows, real investigation involves resources, expertise, and legal authority we don't have. Madison nodded, acknowledging this point without conceding her larger argument. But we have something the official investigators don't, she countered. We know Denver, really know him. His habits, his preferences, his patterns. That's valuable information for finding someone. She wasn't wrong. Personal knowledge could indeed provide insights that formal systems might miss. But the gap between recognizing that advantage and effectively leveraging it to locate someone deliberately hiding seemed vast, particularly for a 12-year-old girl and her overwhelmed mother. Let's focus on the steps we can definitely take, I suggested, starting the car. Completing the assistance applications, gathering documentation for the child support process, following the established procedures. If other opportunities present themselves along the way, we can evaluate them then. Madison didn't protest this practical approach, but the determined set of her jaw told me our conversation had not changed her thinking. She had identified a problem, the slow, uncertain nature of official processes, and had begun formulating alternative solutions, just as she had with her budget plan and assistance program research. As we drove home, I found myself both concerned about and impressed by my daughter's tenacity. Her refusal to accept helplessness, her insistence on finding active solutions rather than passive acceptance, mirrored qualities I needed to cultivate in myself if we were to survive this crisis. What I didn't yet realize was just how effective Madison's determination would prove to be, or how her unorthodox approach to finding Denver would ultimately change the trajectory of our family's recovery in ways I couldn't have imagined. When we arrived home, Frida greeted us with freshly baked cookies and twin boys sticky with chocolate, but beaming with happiness. We had a wonderful afternoon, she assured me. These boys are absolute delights. Thank you so much for watching them, I said sincerely. I don't know what we would have done without your help today. Any time, Frida insisted. Truly. My house is too quiet these days. Having little ones around is good for my soul. As she prepared to leave, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. A few names and numbers, she explained quietly, while Madison helped the twins wash their hands in the kitchen. Friends of mine who might be useful to you. Polly knows family law, retired now but still connected. Bernadette works at the credit union, understands financial hardship programs. And Douglas has experience tracing missing persons. His son disappeared for a time during a custody dispute. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Frida, Thank you. This is incredibly thoughtful. She patted my hand, her expression kind but resolute. Communities take care of their own, dear. Denver may have abandoned his responsibilities, but the rest of us understand what it means to be there for one another. Don't hesitate to call on any of them. They're expecting to hear from you. After Frida left, I studied the list she had provided. Each name included not just a phone number, but a brief note about specific ways they might be able to help. Legal advice, financial counseling, credit repair strategies, investigative techniques. It was essentially a support network I hadn't known existed, activated by Frida's compassion and community connections. "What's that?" Madison asked, coming into the living room after settling the twins with their toys. I handed her the list, watching as her eyes widened with recognition of its significance. "Frida knows people who can help us," she said, immediately grasping the value of these connections. "Real people with real skills, not just government programs." "Yes," I agreed. "It seems we have more resources than I realized." Madison studied the list with particular interest in Douglas Winters, the contact with experience tracing missing persons. "We should call him," she said decisively. "Today, if possible." The eagerness in her voice gave me pause. While I appreciated her initiative, I worried about her growing fixation on finding Denver, a focus that seemed to be taking precedence over processing her own feelings about his abandonment. "Madison," I said carefully, "I understand why finding Denver seems like the most important goal right now, but it's also important that we deal with our feelings about what he did, especially you. He was your father figure for 10 years, and then he just left. That's a profound betrayal, one that deserves to be acknowledged." She stiffened, her expression closing as it had earlier when I'd attempted to discuss her emotions. "I don't want to talk about feelings," she said flatly. "I want to take action. Feelings don't pay bills or find missing stepfathers." "No, but suppressing them doesn't make them go away either," I pointed out gently. "They just come out in other ways, sometimes when we least expect it." Madison's face flushed, a rare sign that I had touched a nerve. "I'm not suppressing anything," she insisted. "I'm choosing to focus on solutions instead of sitting around feeling sad or angry. Isn't that what you're doing too? Making calls? Filling out applications? Meeting with officials instead of just crying about Denver leaving?" Her observation hit uncomfortably close to home. I had indeed been channeling my own emotions into practical action, postponing the deeper grief work that awaited me. Was it hypocritical to caution Madison against the same coping mechanism I was employing? "You're right," I acknowledged, deciding honesty was the best approach. "I have been focusing on practical matters partly to avoid dealing with the pain, but that doesn't mean it's the healthiest strategy for either of us in the long run." Madison seemed surprised by my admission. "So what are we supposed to do? Just sit around feeling bad about something we can't change?" "No," I said thoughtfully. "But maybe we need to make space for both. The practical work of rebuilding our lives and the emotional work of processing what happened. They're not mutually exclusive." She considered this, her natural intellectualism engaging with the concept, despite her resistance to the emotional component. "Like scheduling time for feelings?" she suggested, only half joking. I smiled slightly. "Not exactly. But maybe acknowledging that they're there, that they're valid, and that they deserve attention alongside our problem-solving efforts." Madison nodded slowly, not fully convinced, but at least considering the perspective. "I'll think about it," she conceded. "But right now, I still want to call Mr. Winters. He might have ideas we haven't thought of." I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 6 p.m., approaching dinner time, with the twins already showing signs of hunger and fatigue after their exciting afternoon with Frida. "How about we focus on dinner and bedtime routines first?" I suggested. "We can call Mr. Winters tomorrow when we're fresh and have time for a proper conversation." Madison reluctantly agreed to this compromise, though I could tell she was impatient. For action, for forward momentum in the quest she had assigned herself. As we prepared a simple dinner, pasta with sauce from a jar, the twins' reliable favorite, I reflected on the unexpected evolution of our family dynamic since Denver's departure. Madison had transformed from a typical preteen, concerned primarily with friends and school activities, into something approaching a partner in crisis management. She had accessed reserves of maturity, intelligence, and determination I knew existed within her, but had never expected to see deployed at such a young age or under such painful circumstances. Part of me mourned this accelerated maturation, this premature introduction to adult concerns and responsibilities, but another part recognized and respected the person emerging from the crucible of Denver's betrayal, a young woman of remarkable resilience and resourcefulness, refusing to be defined as a victim, insisting on agency even in the midst of circumstances largely beyond her control. As we sat down to dinner, the twins chattering happily about their adventures with Frida, Madison quietly organizing the child support program packet beside her plate. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the family we had lost, anxiety about the challenges still facing us, but also a growing confidence in our capacity to meet those challenges together. Denver had abandoned us, believing we would fall apart without him, that we were defined by his presence and provision rather than our own strength and capabilities. In leaving, he had revealed not just his own fundamental selfishness, but also an underestimation of those he left behind, particularly the extraordinary 12-year-old girl who was already proving herself more persistent, more loyal, and ultimately, more formidable than he had ever imagined. The next morning arrived with crushing reality. I had exactly 2 weeks to come up with the mortgage payment, or face the beginning of foreclosure proceedings. The twins needed daycare if I was going to work more hours. Madison needed new shoes for the upcoming school year, and the cupboards were growing emptier by the day. I called the community college where I worked part-time, almost begging for additional hours. The department head was sympathetic but unhelpful. Budget cuts meant they were already stretched thin. I called old colleagues, former employers, anyone who might know of immediate job openings. I applied for emergency food assistance and researched debt consolidation programs, each step feeling like a further descent into a pit I wasn't sure I could climb out of. By afternoon, emotionally drained and physically exhausted, I picked up the twins from the neighbor who'd been watching them and returned home to find Madison sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, Denver's laptop open in front of her, surrounded by papers covered in her neat handwriting. "What are you doing?" I asked, setting down the diaper bag as the twins raced toward their toy box. "Working," she replied without looking up. "I had an idea about the password." I sighed, too tired to argue about the futility of our efforts from "It's not a guess," she said, finally looking up at me, her eyes bright with the particular intensity she got when solving a difficult problem. "I've been researching password patterns and making a list of everything we know about Denver. Did you know that most people use variations of the same password across different accounts? They just change a number or add a special character." I joined her on the floor, careful not to disturb her meticulous arrangement of papers. "But we don't know any of Denver's passwords. He never shared them with me." "Not directly," Madison agreed. "But remember when you had to pay that bill online? Last year when Denver was sick, he gave you his work laptop password." The memory surfaced slowly. Denver had indeed shared a password, reluctantly, when he was down with the flu and an urgent insurance payment was due. "Lighthouse, something," I said, straining to recall the details. "Lighthouse 2015, Madison confirmed triumphantly. "I remember because it was the year we visited that lighthouse in Maine, and I thought it was cool that he used it as a password. But we already tried meaningful dates last night," I reminded her. "We tried them in the standard format," she corrected. "But look at this." She pushed one of her papers toward me. It was a list of password formats. Standard word plus year. Lighthouse 2015. Word plus special character plus year. Lighthouse 2015. Year plus word 2015 Lighthouse. Upper lowercase variations. Lighthouse 2015. "Most people follow patterns," she explained. "They don't actually create completely different passwords because it's too hard to remember. They just modify their favorite one." I looked at her with newfound appreciation. "Where did you learn all this?" "Digital detectives, the cyber case." "Files," she replied matter-of-factly. "And also the internet. There are whole websites about password security and how people create weak passwords." The twins had begun squabbling over a toy truck, their voices rising. I moved to intervene, separating them with practiced efficiency and setting up alternative activities to distract them. When I returned to Madison, she had organized her notes into a new configuration. "I think his secret email password is some variation of Lighthouse 2015, she said. "And I think the laptop might use the same pattern but with a different meaningful word." "But what word?" I asked, beginning to catch her enthusiasm despite my exhaustion. "That's what I've been thinking about all day. What would Denver use for a secret account, something he wouldn't want you to find?" She tapped her pencil against her chin. "It would be something meaningful to him but not obvious to you. Something private." I considered this, trying to see Denver not as my husband of 14 years, but as the stranger he had apparently been all along. His brother, I said slowly. Evan. They had some kind of shared history Denver never fully explained. He said they grew up mostly apart because Evan was raised by their father after the divorce. Madison immediately began writing. Evan 2015? Evans 2015? Or maybe… Phoenix. I interrupted, a connection suddenly forming. The email was Phoenix rising. What if that's significant to him and Evan somehow? Madison's eyes widened. Phoenix 2015, she murmured, writing it down. Or Rising 2015. We spent the next hour methodically working through variations, creating a prioritized list of possibilities. The twins, thankfully, had settled into parallel play, occasionally bringing toys for my inspection, but generally content in their own world. As the afternoon waned, Madison sat back, surveying our work. I think Phoenix 2015 is our best guess, she said finally. It connects to the email address, it follows his pattern, and it's meaningful but not obvious. I looked at the laptop, anxiety coiling in my stomach. If we're wrong, we lose access. Forever. If we don't try, we have nothing, Madison countered. And Denver wins. Her framing struck me. In my grief and shock, I'd been thinking of our situation as a tragedy, a cruel twist of fate. Madison saw it differently, as a challenge, a puzzle to be solved, a wrong to be righted. Her perspective wasn't just refreshing, it was empowering. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. Phoenix 2015 it is. Madison gently pushed the laptop toward me. You should do it. You're the grown-up. I hesitated, then shook my head. This was your idea, your research. You should do the honors. Pride flickered across her face as she pulled the laptop closer. With careful precision, she typed in the password, her finger hovering over the enter key. Ready? I nodded, holding my breath. She pressed enter. For a moment, nothing happened. The cursor spun, processing. Then, miraculously, the screen changed, revealing Denver's desktop. You did it, I whispered, hardly daring to believe our success. Madison's face split into a triumphant grin. We did it, she corrected, bumping her, shoulder against mine in a rare display of preteen affection. The desktop was surprisingly sparse, just a few icons and folders with nondescript names like projects and documents. I was momentarily disappointed, having expected some obvious smoking gun, some folder labeled Secret Life or Escape. Plans. Madison, however, was already moving, opening the browser history. Look at this, she said, pointing to a pattern of visits to real estate websites focused on Costa Rica. He was really serious about Costa Rica, I murmured, leaning closer. Not just browsing, Madison said, clicking through to reveal saved searches and favorited properties. He was researching specific areas, tax implications, residency requirements. This wasn't daydreaming, Mom. This was planning. She navigated to the Downloads folder next, revealing a trove of PDFs. Expatriate banking options, Costa Rica permanent residency guide, starting a business abroad. The evidence of Denver's intentions was overwhelming and undeniable. He was planning to leave for months, I said, the reality sinking in with renewed force. Maybe even since the twins were born. Madison nodded grimly, continuing her methodical exploration of the laptop's contents. She opened the email application next, revealing the account we'd speculated about. PhoenixRisingEggmail.com. The inbox was a goldmine. Exchanges with real estate agents in Costa Rica, conversations with financial advisors about offshore banking, and most damning of all, a series of emails with Evan discussing what they called the Phoenix Project. Everything's in place, Madison read from the most recent email to Evan, dated just days before Denver's disappearance. Accounts transferred, tickets purchased. The final extraction happens Friday. Clean break, fresh start, just like we planned. Extraction. The clinical coldness of the word made me physically recoil. That's what we had been to Denver, not a family, but a situation to be extracted from, like a tooth, like a splinter. There's more, Madison said, her voice tight. Listen to this one from Evan. What about C and the kids? Any second thoughts? And Denver's response. They'll be fine. C is resourceful, and the insurance policy will help. Insurance policy, I repeated, confusion momentarily overriding my hurt. We don't have life insurance. Madison was already searching the laptop, Opening folders, scanning documents. She found it in a folder labeled simply, Contingency, a life insurance policy, taken out 18 months earlier, with me as the beneficiary. $500,000, she read, her voice small with shock. But if he's not dead, we can't claim it, I finished, the twisted logic of Denver's plan becoming clear. He gives himself an exit, and if his conscience ever bothers him, he can tell himself he left us provided for. We just can't access the provision. That's evil, Madison said, the childish words somehow perfectly encapsulating the calculated cruelty of Denver's actions. I couldn't argue with her assessment. The man revealed in these emails and documents was not the Denver I thought I knew. This was someone capable of methodical deception, someone who could plan for months to abandon his family while presenting a facade of normalcy. As we continued exploring the laptop's contents, a more immediate and practical discovery emerged. Denver had compiled detailed records of all the accounts he had opened in our names, complete with login credentials, current balances, and payment schedules. It was, essentially, a roadmap of the financial maze he had constructed, information that would prove invaluable in negotiating with creditors. But the most significant find came as Madison clicked through Denver's calendar application. There, marked for the day after his disappearance, was an entry that made my heart race. 10:15 a.m., property closing. Bernadette to finalize paperwork. Bernadette? Madison asked, looking up at me. The name meant nothing to me, but the context sent a chill down my spine. Property closing, I repeated. Denver was buying property, the day after he left. Madison was already searching Denver's emails for the name Bernadette. She found several exchanges with a Bernadette Winters, identified in her signature line as a real estate attorney specializing in international property transfers. Look at the amount, Madison said, pointing to a figure in one of the emails. $475,000 USD, final transfer to be completed upon client's arrival and in-person signature. The air seemed to leave the room. Nearly $500,000. Money that, by all rights, should have included my marital share. Money that Denver had somehow accumulated and hidden, all while drowning us in debt. Mom, Madison said, her voice suddenly urgent. That closing date was yesterday, which means Denver is still in the country, I finished, the implications crystallizing with perfect clarity. At least until the property transfer is complete. Madison nodded, eyes bright with the thrill of discovery. And we know exactly where he is, or at least where he'll be. As the twins began clamoring for dinner, I sat back, mind racing with possibilities. For the first time since finding Denver's goodbye letter, I felt something other than despair and panic. I felt purpose, direction, and yes, a cold, clarifying anger. We've got him, Madison said, echoing my thoughts with the satisfied certainty of a detective wrapping up a case. Now, we just need to figure out what to do about it. What indeed? As I stood to prepare dinner for my children, the question echoed in my mind. Denver had betrayed us, abandoned us, stolen from us. Now, thanks to Madison's determination and unexpected investigative skills, we had found him. But finding him was just the beginning. What came next would require even more courage, and perhaps a different kind of justice than I had initially imagined. That night, after the twins were asleep, Madison and I sat at the kitchen table with Denver's laptop open, between us formulating a plan. The property closing with Bernadette Winters was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at the Palmetto Grove Hotel in downtown Tampa, just a 40-minute drive from our home. We could just show up, Madison suggested, her eyes alight with the possibility of confrontation. Surprise him in the middle of the meeting, I shook my head. We have the twins to think about. And bursting into a legal proceeding might not be the most effective approach. But we have evidence, Madison insisted, gesturing to the laptop. We can prove he forged your signature on those loans. Evidence that would be useful in court, I agreed. But confronting Denver directly isn't about legal proceedings. It's about leveraging what we know to get what we need. Madison looked at me curiously. What do we need? Immediate financial support, access to any hidden accounts, his agreement to take responsibility for the fraudulent debt, and eventually, formal child support. So we're going to blackmail him, Madison concluded with disturbing enthusiasm. Not blackmail, I corrected hastily. Negotiation. We're going to give him a chance to do the right thing before we involve the authorities. I considered our options carefully. We couldn't ambush Denver with the twins in tow, and a direct confrontation might provoke him to flee immediately. We need leverage, I said finally. Something that would make Denver agree to meet with us on our terms. Madison's eyes narrowed in concentration. What about Bernadette, the real estate attorney? If we contacted her first, told her the truth about Denver using fraudulent funds and abandoning his family, she'd have professional concerns about proceeding with a transaction that could be legally contested later. The idea had merit. Madison was already searching through Denver's emails, finding Bernadette's contact information. Here's her cell number. It says direct line for urgent matters. My heart raced as I contemplated what we were about to do. This wasn't just about finding Denver anymore. It was about actively intervening in his plans, asserting our rights, demanding justice. Let's call her first thing in the morning, I decided. For now, we need to prepare what we're going to say, and gather the evidence we'll need. Madison nodded solemnly, then hesitated. Mom, what if Denver gets angry? The question revealed the child beneath her investigative facade. I squeezed her hand. Denver is many things, but he's not violent, and we're not going to be alone. This seemed to satisfy her, and we spent the next hour compiling our evidence, screenshots of Denver's emails, documentation of the fraudulent loans, records of the hidden funds. We should get some sleep, I said, noting it was nearly midnight. Tomorrow's going to be challenging. Madison closed the laptop, but her expression remained thoughtful. Do you think Denver ever loved us, or was it all fake from the beginning? The question hit me like a physical blow. I think Denver did love us in his way, but his love had conditions and limits that ours didn't. When responsibility became too heavy, his love wasn't strong enough to keep him here. Madison considered this, her face solemn beyond her years. That's not real love, then. No, I agreed softly. I suppose it isn't. Morning arrived with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt since Denver's disappearance. I called Frida, explaining that I had an urgent legal matter to address and needed someone to watch the twins for a few hours. She agreed without hesitation. With the twins taken care of, Madison and I sat at the kitchen table, my phone on speaker between us, and called Bernadette Winters. She answered on the third ring, her voice brisk and professional. Bernadette Winters, speaking. Ms. Winters, my name is Colleen Reynolds, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. I believe you're handling a property closing today for my husband, Denver Reynolds. There was a brief pause. I don't discuss client matters with third parties, Mrs. Reynolds. My husband has abandoned me and our 3 children, I interrupted. He's left us with over $50,000 in fraudulent debt, and he's attempting to transfer funds that legally include my marital share. I have evidence of all of this, which I'll be sharing with the authorities. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Reynolds, these are serious allegations. They are, I agreed, and they could potentially complicate your transaction today, creating liability issues for your firm. Or we could resolve this directly, without involving police or the bar association. Madison gave me a thumbs up, clearly impressed by my firm approach. What exactly are you proposing? Bernadette asked, her tone now cautious. A meeting. Today, before the closing. Just Denver, myself, and my daughter. You're welcome to be present as a witness. Your daughter? She repeated, sounding confused. Yes, my 12-year-old daughter. The one who tracked Denver down when he thought he'd disappeared without a trace. I allowed a hint of pride to enter my voice. The line went silent. When Bernadette spoke again, her voice had changed. I'll speak with Mr. Reynolds. If what you're saying is true, it would indeed be in everyone's best interest to resolve this privately. I'll email you the evidence, I said. That would be helpful, she acknowledged. I'll call you back within the hour. As the call ended, Madison let out a whoop of triumph. She totally believed you. Let's not celebrate yet, I cautioned. Denver could still refuse to meet with us. Then she'll know he's hiding something, Madison pointed out. And she might not want to proceed with the closing. She was right. We had created a situation where Denver would face consequences whether he agreed to meet us or not. I quickly compiled the most compelling evidence from Denver's laptop and sent it to Bernadette's email. Then we waited. 45 minutes later, my phone rang. Madison grabbed my hand, squeezing tight as I answered. "Mrs. Reynolds." Bernadette's voice was cool and measured. "I've spoken with your husband. He's agreed to meet with you at noon today, in a private dining room at the Palmetto Grove. I'll be present to ensure the discussion remains civil." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you, Ms. Winters. We'll be there." "One more thing," she added. "After reviewing the materials you sent, I've advised Mr. Reynolds that I cannot in good conscience proceed with the closing until these matters are resolved. My ethical obligations as an attorney require nothing less." As the call ended, Madison and I looked at each other in stunned silence before breaking into enormous grins. "We did it," Madison whispered, awe in her voice. "Part 1, I reminded her. "We still have to face Denver and get him to agree to our terms." Madison's expression hardened with determination. "He will. We have the evidence, the leverage, and the truth. He's got nothing but lies." The Palmetto Grove Hotel stood like a gleaming monument to luxury in downtown Tampa. As Madison and I walked through the revolving doors into the marble-floored lobby, I felt acutely out of place in my sensible blouse and slacks. Madison, however, seemed entirely unfazed. She had insisted on dressing professionally for the meeting, wearing her navy blue school uniform skirt with a crisp, white button-down shirt. She carried a folder containing printed copies of our evidence, clutching it to her chest like a shield. "Remember the plan," I murmured as we approached the reception desk. "Let me do most of the talking. Stay calm, no matter what Denver says." Madison nodded, her expression serious. "I know, Mom. I won't lose my cool." As we rode the elevator up, my stomach churned with anxiety, anger, and lingering hurt. I was about to face the man who had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. "You okay?" Madison asked, noticing my shaking hands. "Just nervous," I admitted. "It's been a week since I've seen him." "He's the one who should be nervous," she replied with conviction. "Not you." The elevator doors opened onto a hushed corridor. A tall woman in an impeccable charcoal suit stood waiting. "Mrs. Reynolds?" she asked, extending her hand. "Bernadette Winters. Thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct and assessing. She looked down at Madison with a raised eyebrow. "This is my daughter, Madison," I explained. "She's an integral part of this discussion." Bernadette nodded. "Your husband is waiting inside. I've explained that I cannot proceed with the property transfer until these allegations are addressed." "They're not allegations," Madison said quietly. "They're facts. We have proof." Bernadette studied her for a moment, then inclined her head. "Slightly. Then let's proceed." She opened the door to reveal a small, elegant dining room with a polished oak table at its center. And there, standing by the window with his back to us, was Denver. He turned as we entered, and the sight of him hit me like a physical blow. He looked exactly the same. The same sandy hair, the same blue eyes, the same slight smile that had once made my heart skip a beat. "Colleen," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I see you brought Madison." His eyes flickered to our daughter, and something passed across his face. Discomfort, guilt, perhaps even fear. "She deserves to hear this as much as I do," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "She's the one who found you, after all." Denver's eyebrows rose slightly. "Found me? I wasn't hiding." "Really?" Madison stepped forward, her voice surprisingly steady. "Then why did you tell us your old laptop was broken when it wasn't? Why did you create a secret email account? Why did you tell Mom you were going to a conference in Phoenix when you were really meeting with Ms. Winters about buying property in Costa Rica with money you stole from our family?" The color drained from Denver's face. "Perhaps we should all sit down," Bernadette suggested, gesturing to the table. We arranged ourselves like adversaries at a negotiation table, Denver on one side, Madison and me on the other, with Bernadette at the head. "I understand there are some financial disagreements to resolve," Bernadette began diplomatically. "Disagreements?" I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "Is that what we're calling it when someone forges their spouse's signature on loan documents, drains the family savings, and abandons their children with $50,000 in debt?" Denver's jaw tightened. I left money in the account. $843, I replied. Not even enough for a month of groceries, let alone the mortgage payment due next week. I was going to send more, he insisted, not meeting my eyes. Once I was settled. After you bought your villa in Costa Rica? Madison interjected. With the $500,000 you hid from us? The money that legally belongs partly to Mom? Denver's eyes narrowed as he stared at his daughter. How do you know about— We know everything, I cut in, opening the folder Madison had brought and spreading documents across the table. The fraudulent loans, the secret bank accounts, the property purchase, your Phoenix project with Evan. We have the emails, Denver. We have it all. His face went ashen as he looked at the printed evidence of his betrayal. You hacked my accounts, he said weakly. Madison gave him a withering look. We didn't hack anything. You left your laptop at home, the one you said was broken. Turns out it works just fine. Denver ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our marriage. Look, this isn't how I wanted things to go. I was planning to make arrangements for you and the kids once I was established. Arrangements? I repeated, incredulous. We're not a vacation property you can arrange for from afar. We're your family. Or we were, until you decided we were expendable. Bernadette cleared her throat. Mr. Reynolds, these documents raise serious legal concerns. The loan applications appear to contain forged signatures, which could constitute fraud. And the movement of marital assets without disclosure or consent has implications for both the property transfer and potential divorce proceedings. Denver's expression hardened. I earned that money. I worked 60-hour weeks for years. While I raised our children, I shot back. While I put my career on hold to support yours. That makes it our money, Denver, not just yours. What do you want? He asked bluntly, looking between us. Why are you really here? I took a deep breath. We want what's rightfully ours. Financial support for your children. Your agreement to take responsibility for the fraudulent debt. And a portion of the assets you've hidden. Or what? He challenged. You'll go to the police? Create a public scandal? Drag the kids through a messy legal battle? Is that really what you want, Colleen? His attempt to intimidate me might have worked a week ago. But now, seeing the calculating look in his eyes, I felt nothing but a cold clarity. What I want, I said evenly, is for my children to be secure. What I want is for the man who promised to protect them to live up to at least that much of his responsibility. But if you're asking what I'll do if you refuse? I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. Everything necessary. Madison slid another document across the table, a draft police report I'd prepared, detailing Denver's financial fraud. We're not bluffing, she said simply. Denver stared at the document, then at his 12-year-old daughter, as if seeing her. The attorney hesitated, glancing at me for confirmation. I nodded. I'll be just outside, she said, rising gracefully and exiting the room. When the door closed behind her, Denver's carefully constructed facade crumbled. His shoulders slumped, and when he spoke, his voice was hollow. I never meant to hurt you, he said, not looking at either of us. Or the boys. I couldn't breathe anymore. The responsibility, the routine, the endless demands. It was suffocating me. So you decided to suffocate us instead, Madison observed, her voice quiet but cutting. With debt and lies. Denver winced. It wasn't like that. I was going to make it right eventually. By running away to Costa Rica? I asked. By hiding money that could have secured your children's future? That's not making anything right, Denver. That's cowardice. He flinched at the word, but didn't deny it. What do you want me to do? I slid a document across the table. A proposal. I'd stayed up late preparing, outlining terms that would allow Denver his freedom while ensuring our family's security. Sign over half the money from your Phoenix project fund, I said. Take responsibility for the fraudulent loans, set up a proper child support arrangement for the twins, and transfer the title of the house to me. Denver's eyes widened as he scanned the document. That's almost everything. No, I corrected him. That's less than you owe us legally and morally, but it's enough for us to rebuild our lives after you destroyed them. A muscle twitched in his jaw as he considered the proposal, weighing the Cost of agreeing against the consequences of refusal. And if I sign this, you won't go to the police? He asked finally. If you sign it and follow through, I clarified. This isn't just about your signature, Denver. It's about actual support for your children. He looked at Madison, who was watching him with unwavering eyes. Did you really track me down? He asked her, a note of disbelief in his voice. She nodded, not elaborating. Denver sighed deeply, then reached for the pen I'd placed on the table. You always were too smart for your own good, he told her, a hint of grudging respect in his voice. No, Madison replied evenly. I was too smart for your good. There's a difference. As Denver signed the agreement, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only profound sadness for what had been lost and relief for what had been salvaged. This man I had loved, had built a life with, was now effectively a stranger signing a contract. When he finished, he slid the paper back across the table. I'll tell Bernadette to transfer the funds today, he said quietly. You should have access. By tomorrow. I nodded, gathering the documents and placing them back in the folder. The twins ask about you, I said, unsure why I was telling him this. Will missed you at bedtime. He kept asking for Daddy story. A flash of pain crossed Denver's face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. He began, then faltered. Tell them But there was nothing he could say. No message that would make sense of his abandonment to 3-year-old boys who had adored their father unconditionally. Just go, Denver, Madison said, her voice suddenly tired. We'll figure it out. We always do. It was the dismissal of a child who had grown up too quickly, who had seen the failings of adults too clearly. Denver seemed to shrink under the weight of it, nodding once before standing to leave. At the door he paused, looking back at us, his wife and daughter, the family he had discarded. For a moment, I thought he might say something meaningful, something that would help us understand. Instead, he simply nodded again and walked out. Madison reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it tightly as the door closed behind him. We did it, Mom, she whispered. I squeezed back, fighting tears. We did. You did. The money arrived, exactly as Denver had promised. A bank transfer of $237,500, half of the funds he had hidden away for his new life in Costa Rica. Standing at the ATM the next morning, staring at the balance that had appeared overnight in my account, I felt a complex swirl of emotions: relief, vindication, lingering anger, and beneath it all, a profound sadness for what had been broken, beyond repair. That's a lot of money, Madison observed quietly. It is, I agreed. And every penny is going toward securing our future, paying off the fraudulent debt, catching up on the mortgage, setting aside college funds for you and the twins. She nodded, satisfied with this practical approach. What about Denver? Will he still go to Costa Rica? I sighed, tucking the ATM receipt into my wallet. I don't know, honey. With half the money gone, his plans might change, but that's not our concern anymore. We walked back to the car in contemplative silence. The past 24 hours had transformed our situation so dramatically that it was difficult to fully process. Yesterday morning, we had been facing financial ruin. Today, we had resources and a path forward. Mom? Madison said as we drove home. I've been thinking about something. Denver said he felt suffocated by responsibility, but I don't understand how he could feel that way and just leave, especially the twins. They're so little. It was the question at the heart of Denver's betrayal, the one I had been struggling with myself. How could someone walk away from their own children? I wish I had a simple answer, I said carefully. But I think some people just aren't built for the kind of love that parenting requires, the kind that puts someone else's needs above your own, day after day, year after year. But you are, she said with absolute certainty. Built for it. I mean, her faith in me brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I try to be, I said softly. Every day. That's why we're going to be okay, Madison declared. Because you never give up. The next weeks passed in a blur of practical actions. I paid off the fraudulent loans, catching up on all the delinquent accounts Denver had left behind. I consulted with a lawyer about formalizing our separation and securing child support for the twins. I transferred the mortgage to my name alone, as Denver had agreed. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of our lives, like clearing away the wreckage of Denver's betrayal to reveal the foundation we could rebuild upon. Madison, having proven her capabilities during our crisis, took on a new role in our household. Not as a caretaker or a second parent, I was careful to preserve her childhood as much as possible, but as a trusted advisor and genuine partner in our family's decisions. We should convert the home office into a playroom for the boys, she suggested one evening. They need more space to burn energy, especially during rainy season. She was right. The office, formerly Denver's domain, had sat unused since his departure, a museum to his absence. Transforming it into a space filled with children's laughter seemed like the perfect metaphor for our new beginning. The twins, approaching their 4th birthday, had gradually stopped asking for their father with the same frequency. Now it was an occasional question. When is Daddy coming home? Easily redirected to a new activity or interest. 6 weeks after our confrontation with Denver, I received a text message from Bernadette Winters. Thought you should know. Denver. Completed purchase of a much smaller property in Costa Rica yesterday, approximately 1/4 the value of original. Evan is with him. He asked how the twins were doing. I showed the message to Madison, who read it with an inscrutable expression. So he still went, she said finally, even with less money. It seems so. Did he ever really love us, Mom? She asked, the question catching me off guard. I considered my answer carefully. I think Denver loved the idea of us, the perfect family, the beautiful home, the successful life. But when the reality required sacrifice and commitment, his love wasn't strong enough. Madison nodded, processing this. That's not real love then. No, I agreed. It wasn't. I'm glad we found out, she said after a moment, her voice steady. Even though it hurt, it's better to know the truth. Her wisdom, so beyond her 12 years, never ceased to amaze me. Yes, I said. It's always better to know the truth, even when it's painful. Then you can build your life on reality, not illusion. She smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. We're building a pretty good life, aren't we? Looking around our home, the twins playing contentedly in their new playroom, the bills paid, the future secured, I had to agree. Yes, we are. A better one than I imagined possible 6 weeks ago. Though the path had been painful, we had emerged from Denver's betrayal stronger, closer, and more self-reliant than before. The $50,000 of debt that had once threatened to drown us was gone. The secrets that had poisoned our family had been exposed and cleansed away. 1 year after Denver's disappearance, I received a small package in the mail. The return. Address was Costa Rica, but there was no name. Inside was a handwritten note and 3 small carved wooden turtles, for the boy's birthday and for Madison. I think of them often. D.I. showed the note to Madison, who studied it with the careful neutrality she now reserved for anything related to Denver. Are you going to give the twins their turtles? She asked. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I decided. With a simple explanation that they're a gift from their father. They deserve to know he thinks of them, even from far away. Madison nodded, accepting my decision. What about mine? That's entirely up to you, I told her. You can keep it, give it away, or I can send it back. Whatever feels right to you. She took the small carving, turning it over in her hands. The turtle's shell was intricately detailed, its head stretched, forward as if determinedly moving ahead despite its burden. I'll keep it, she said finally. Not because it's from him, but because turtles carry their homes on their backs. They're never really lost, no matter where they go. She placed the carving on her bookshelf. It'll remind me that home isn't a place or a person who might leave. It's something you carry inside you. Listening to my daughter's wisdom, I felt a complex emotion that transcended the hurt and betrayal of the past year. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, Madison had developed a resilience and insight that would serve her well throughout her life. 2 months to the day after, Denver walked out of our lives. I received a job offer from the community college where I'd been working part-time, a full-time position as research librarian with benefits, flexible hours, and significantly better pay. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. With the twins starting preschool 3 mornings a week, I could work while they were in school, and during the afternoons when Madison was home to help. That evening, we celebrated with pizza and ice cream, the twins' favorite. It felt like a milestone worth marking. "I have an announcement," Madison said as we finished our ice cream. "I've decided what I want to be when I grow up." "A detective?" I guessed, smiling. She shook her head. "A lawyer, like Ms. Winters, but working for people who need help. People who've been taken advantage of, like we were." I studied her face, seeing the seriousness behind her declaration. This wasn't a child's fleeting career fantasy, but a genuine calling born from our experience. "I think you'd make an exceptional lawyer," I told her. "You're smart, detail-oriented, and you have a strong sense of justice. Plus, I already have courtroom experience," she added with a grin, referring to our confrontation with Denver. As the weeks turned into months, our new routine solidified. The house that had once felt empty without Denver gradually filled with new energy, new traditions, new memories that were entirely our own. The twins flourished, their natural exuberance undiminished by their father's absence. Madison threw herself into school with renewed purpose, her grades reflecting her newfound confidence and direction. And I discovered strengths within myself I hadn't known existed. The ability to be both mother and father to my children, to manage a household and career single-handedly, to make decisions without second-guessing myself. That night, as I tucked the twins into bed, their wooden turtles proudly displayed on their nightstands, I reflected on the extraordinary journey we had traveled. From the devastating shock of Denver's betrayal to the desperate days of financial crisis, from Madison's remarkable detective work to our confrontation at the Palmetto Grove, we had faced challenges that might have broken a less determined family. Instead, we had emerged stronger, more tightly bonded, more resilient than before. The $50,000 of debt that had once threatened to drown us was now a distant memory. The future that had seemed so precarious was now secure, built not on Denver's promises, but on our own capabilities. As I turned out the light, Mason mumbled sleepily, "Love you, Mommy." "Love you too, sweetheart," I whispered. "More than you'll ever know." Pausing at Madison's room on my way to bed, I found her already asleep, a book about famous female lawyers open beside her. I gently removed it, placing it on her nightstand next to the wooden turtle. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I had complete faith in her ability to face them, and in my own. Denver had abandoned us with twins and $50,000 in debt, believing he was leaving behind a burden too heavy to bear. What he hadn't realized, what my extraordinary 12-year-old daughter had discovered, was that within that seeming burden lay our greatest strength, each other, and that, in the end, was worth more than all the Costa Rican villas in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.